Welcome to Fantastic Tones for Human Bones. I am Robert Woods-Ledoux. My co-host Mark Piscucci Clifford is here.
Hello.
And today we have the pleasure of interviewing our good friend Rob Ewing. Rob is a trombone player, a multi-instrumentalist, an educator, a band leader. What's your actual title at the jazz school? Are you a director?
That's exactly what I am. Director of, so the jazz school, just to give a little bit of info about that, the jazz school is part of the California Jazz Conservatory. So the jazz school is the community music school part of the CJC, and I'm the director of the community music school there.
And you were instrumental in getting the CJC aspect of that happening, right?
I mean, I've been around for a long time, but no, I would say that's the part of the program. Basically, I came in as director when the degree program there started, kind of took over that role from Susan Muscarella, who started the school back in 25 years ago.
And so when did you start at the school, actually?
Right when I first moved to the Bay Area, which was back in 2001, I started actually as a student there, just taking classes, playing in ensembles, and then, started working there just kind of casually, working the front desk kind of thing, and just stuck around. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've been director of that program since 2009.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Happy to be here. Big fan. It's good to be back.
Yes. It's good to see you back. Good to have you back.
Yeah, you are our first repeat guest. Oh, no, actually, we had Matt on. We did the horror episode and then his episode.
Oh yeah, with the horror film. But the listening that we had from our Bandcamp Rex episode was a heavy homework, I would say. That was really cool.
Yeah, as was the listening for this episode. As it so happens, your repertoire required a lot of listening.
Yep.
So let's start with your background. You had graciously sent us a pretty detailed bio, and you mentioned that you grew up in Pasadena.
Yeah, I was born in Southern California, in LA area, and grew up in Pasadena. And that is where I started playing music, kind of in elementary school band and things of that nature. And, started playing trombone in the third grade down there in the public schools. And then was in that area until middle school. But really, I think I mentioned in there that there was like a particular experience that I've thought about and wanted to kind of dig back into, but haven't done the digging just yet. But there was a program down there at the Boys Club of Pasadena. For some reason, for anybody who might not be familiar with the Boys Club, it's kind of a community center for kids, Boys and Girls Club. Mm-hmm. It's called these days, but and so they would just have all kinds of activities. But for some reason, this particular location in Pasadena had this amazing music program. And, it was just, they had, that was really where I got started in a serious way, at that age, if we can talk about being serious when you're, barely 10 or 12 years old. But they just had this, program where I would go, they had bands, like concert band kind of thing. I would go for private lessons every week. They had a marching band that I was part of. They had a jazz band, which was actually for older kids, but that was really probably, my first exposure to something like jazz, which really totally caught me, at that time, just seeing, they seemed much older. They were probably teenagers, but just playing clarinets and things and improvising. I was like, what is that? So I was totally fascinated.
Yeah. That's a pretty young age to get into jazz, for most people at least.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I was like seriously into it, but something about just the spirit of it, something about the kind of, there was like the, I mean, I didn't know anything about the style or anything, but something about just the energy and the looseness of it kind of spoke to me. You know, there was just kind of like as contrasted with like concert band and, you know, which was fun too, but was more kind of rigid in the way you do it, just reading your part the best you can. You know, I was just definitely.
Yeah. So I'm personally curious, just while we're right here, I mean, we're not going to linger here long, but did you ever get into like classical rep or anything like that? Was that ever part of your scope?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And was that like high school time or? Yeah,
middle school and, you know, middle school, high school. I was, I mean, jumping ahead a little bit. When I was in high school, I was taking trombone lessons, and I had a jazz teacher and a classical teacher at the same time, kind of overlapping. And it was, you know, I'm not sure whose idea that was, but it was
it's a good idea.
It was fascinating, you know. I mean, just because it was like a totally one. The jazz player was this guy named Jim Fryer, who's amazing, who I'm still in touch with, and he plays in the he plays in Vince Giordano's band. I don't know if you guys know that group, kind of like well known for kind of 20s style jazz, and they did the music for that show Boardwalk Empire. That's probably what they're most known for, but amazing player. And then my other teacher was this guy Dave Kaiser, who's like primarily a classical player and played in brass quintets and things like that. So it was definitely cool.
Was it through the school that you were studying with these people?
So this was a little later, and by that point I had moved to Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
And there was a really great kind of community music school, somewhat similar to the jazz school where I am now, called Neighborhood Music School in New Haven. And I would go there to take lessons and play in like the youth orchestra and things like that.
Well, and because of what is it? Is it Wesleyan out there?
Mm-hmm.
Like there must have been a lot of just really strong musical cats out there in general that would be feeding into the scene.
Yeah, I mean,
in general, right? And would you feel that like even in your youth, and be feeding off of that and learning from them, or?
Yes, and I mean, especially when I was in high school. I mean, I would say there's kind of some different scenes in that area where I was in Connecticut. One was the Wesleyan is in Middletown, Connecticut, which was pretty close to where I was growing up. I would go out there almost every week because Anthony Braxton had a weekly gig.
Ooh, oh, wow. Okay.
We would go see them play. You know, my friends, we would drive out there, and his gig was as like a little, basically like a little coffee shop bookstore kind of thing, and they would play every week. And that was unbelievable. But
what kind of ensemble was that?
So this was like his group that would play jazz standards, and he had a quartet, and Braxton was playing piano.
What?
Yeah. I know, right? So that's part of his thing for sure. But he would, and the way that they structured it was really cool. So it would be a quartet with usually saxophone, bass drums, and Braxton on piano. And, it would be a combination of people that he had played with for a long time, but also sometimes it would be students from Wesleyan, some of his students, I assume. But the way that he structured the set was that so this, just to kind of give a little bit of context of the time period that we're talking about. So this is like the early to mid 90s kind of a thing. And he would come out to right when the band was about to play, Braxton would come out with a stack of like photocopies of charts. And they were photocopies of tunes straight out of the real book, the classic jazz real book.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he would just hand a little stack to each of the players in the group of 7 or 8 tunes or something, just like standards from the real book. And the way that they would do the set is they would play a tune, improvise on it, and then kind of go into like a free zone and then that would somehow morph into the next tune.
Oh wow.
So the whole set would be like that. There'd be no breaks between any of the tunes. Just a full set of 7 or 8 tunes, just like
That's super cool.
playing the tune, but then deconstructing it and morphing into the next thing. Yeah, it was super cool.
That sounds amazing. And I also like, because there's so much like, okay, yeah, the real book is a very well-known and standard resource, but I was always taught to use it just as a resource and then never use it as like the Bible, essentially. It shouldn't be at the gig. Like, you should know the tunes. So it's really interesting to me that someone like Braxton would just bring in like photocopies
Yes.
from the real book and be like, all right, here we go. Here's the gig.
Yes.
Here's the gig.
Totally. But yeah, he definitely wasn't like, precious about any of that, any of like the rules of the jazz tradition or something like that. But it was, I mean, they got into some stuff. And at that time I was like I was definitely into jazz, but I would say I was mostly into more of like the avant-garde side of things. And,
interesting.
And that really, that was working for me at that time.
Okay.
Yeah. How did your listening accompany your schooling? When you were back in Pasadena, were you listening to jazz at that time?
Not really. I mean, I was pretty young at that point. I would say like I got more into listening when I was after I'd moved to Connecticut, going into high school. Really was probably when that got serious. I remember the first time I heard Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, I think when I was in the ninth grade, and our jazz band director put that on for us. And I still remember how mystifying it was to hear that, I mean, that record now, it's like, it's so ingrained that it just feels very natural, but just like the sound of hearing the rhythm section and the soloist, like, and not really understanding what the forms were and things like that. It was just like totally alien, but I still remember what it felt like to hear that. But yeah, that was around the ninth grade when I started getting a little more serious about listening, things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that around the same time, Milestones was one of my most formative, like, I would listen deeply over and over and over, I think it's because I was drumming and Philly Joe's drumming on that is, it's quintessential. It's like one of the best jazz drumming records for that kind of, for that context and everything. But, just the first 3 notes of Miles' solo coming out of So What, man, that it just sticks in there. It's a magical sounding record.
Were you listening to other stuff as well? It seems like you were heavy into jazz in high school already. But you were studying classical as well. I mean, were you listening, were you checking out other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, for classical music, I would say I never really got into like a serious listening thing, but I was playing in orchestras and things like that, and I really loved it. Like I remember listening to the music that we were playing, in those groups. I mean, we have to like, again, kind of recontextualize the era, when albums weren't as accessible as they are now, of course. So you would have like certain tapes and things that you would listen to a lot. But, I remember listening to one of the pieces that we were playing was the Russian Easter Overture, Rimsky-Korsakov, and that has like kind of a trombone solo in one section. So that's why it caught my ear at the time. But it's a beautiful piece. I remember spending a lot of time with that, listening to that, and I found it very moving. But yeah, and I was into like a lot of normal stuff,
What's normal stuff?
Rock and roll and things like that. I was growing up listening to like Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. It wasn't all highbrow by any means.
Yeah, I mean, Korsakov can really write for brass.
Yes.
One of the first things I did with the youth orchestra was Scheherazade, and oh my goodness.
Totally.
I was on timp for that, and it the first time we played in a rehearsal and I came in with the brass, Like it brought me to tears. I didn't know what was going on because I didn't know the piece. I was just counting and trying to play it right. And then we all came in together and it just like melted me as like a, somewhere in high school.
You were playing timpani in orchestra?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was just,
you're back there with the brass section.
Yeah. We're all chilling and goofing off.
Messing around. You have like 450 measures of rest and you're like, all right, we got to do something with our time.
Dude, I used to have you remember those things that they would vend in like a 50-cent machine, that like a sticky hand that you could throw?
Yes, sure.
I used to mess with the brass section so hard because I would wait right until their entrances were about to go, and I would throw the sticky hand and take the music right off of their stand during rehearsal.
Yes.
Oh man, I got them in huge trouble.
I'm sure everyone loved that, especially the conductor.
100%. Yes, everyone loved it. It was no, man. It was like no. If I imagine my students doing that now, I would be furious. 100%.
Certain other things that come to mind that like really kind of just like got me excited about music in those early years. Like when I was still in Southern California, there was in the school there at one point there was like an assembly or something, and then I wasn't part of it, but there was like a drum corps at the school, or a drum line or something like that, whatever the term was they were using. But it was just drummers, not with other instruments. But it was like, and they like bust into the auditorium, coming down each of the aisles of the auditorium, and all the kids are in there, and just like the loudest possible thing, all the snare drums and everything. It was just I was loving that. That was definitely speaking to me. And also like I would play in like some of these. I had a lot of nice opportunities as a youngster, like playing concert bands and things. Like I remember playing Holst, the Planets. That was like another good one for brass players, but all that kind of stuff.
So you are today a very serious multi-instrumentalist. Were you at the time learning other instruments, or was it just trombone?
Yeah, I mean, trombone was definitely my first instrument. Before that I played recorder and stuff, but trombone was the main thing. And then I think in middle school, some of the other instruments started to come in. My younger brother had a drum set, and I kind of took that over, and I would play it more than him. He was actually pretty good, but I just kind of gravitated towards that. And then around that, maybe a little bit later, I started playing bass, like maybe around 9th grade or something like that. It was just one of those things, like you're in high school and there start to be these opportunities playing a band, and sure, I play the bass, never having touched it before, that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
And then, more recently I would say because of being at the school and teaching ensembles and things, you pick up a little bit of this, a little bit of that to be able to play, especially with the rhythm section instruments. I imagine all of you have had a similar experience with that, of just like being able to play some bass, play some drums, play some keyboards, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I've learned my 2-5-1s recently because of my middle school jazz ensemble. Mm-hmm. On the bass, I mean. But yeah, just the structure of it.
But I would also say that I've just like, that's always been kind of like a personality thing for me, of just like not wanting to focus so much on just one instrument, always being kind of interested in something else, So sometimes to my own detriment, of just like having a hard time, just like really, I admire people who just like focus on one instrument and just like get amazing at it, that's.
Yeah, but there's something cool about like, going through cycles of practice where, sometimes I'll get very, very serious about practicing the piano, where it's like scales and learning Brahms rep and things like, things of that nature. And that's really cool for a while. And then, you cycle through, do you feel like you do the same thing where you get like super locked in and you're like, this is the focus for a while, and you make a lot of progress, and then the next musical thing comes up and you pursue that?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think when I was younger, like in those high school and maybe even a little later college years and things, it was like, there's, trombone it's hard. It's a hard instrument. So sometimes it can get a little frustrating, like, oh man, I could just, these other instruments are so much easier, I could just play this, whatever. So that was some of what would come into it, of just thinking like that. I don't really feel that way anymore, but that was part of it. You just get frustrated with a particular instrument and then just try to focus on something else. I guess that does still come up, but I just kind of frame it a little bit differently, of saying, oh no, I'm just like intrigued by, harmony now, or I want to get into polyrhythms over here, or whatever it might be, just different focuses at different times.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're, in my experience, you're very good about talking through your interests and what your practice is with people. And I think we'll get into that a little bit, even on your SoundCloud lessons. It's very cool. But also, like the videos that you put up just to help people practice for gigs that are coming up, things like that. It's very cool. We'll dig into that in a bit, but
I have a question. Radiohead became such an important band for you later on. Were you at all into Radiohead back in the day in the 90s, in the Pablo Honey OK Computer time period?
A little bit. I was into Creep. That was their big hit, of course, but the early on. But then I think and with a lot of kind of jazz players kind of come back to it through the back door, by way of like what Brad Mehldau was doing when he would play Radiohead songs, and you're like, oh yeah, you can improvise on these things, So that,
when did he start doing that actually?
mid-90s.
That was at the back of the Trio Volume 4, or back of the Vanguard Trio Volume 4 at least, and then Largo. Mm-hmm. He had a bunch of stuff where he was doing that.
Mid-90s, huh?
I think so. Might have been a little bit later than that, but definitely not later than like 2000 or something. But yeah, like Exit Music for a Film was one, and I think it's on the same record where he did like, Nick Drake. And so that whole concept of like improvising on contemporary rock and pop tunes, I think that spoke to a lot of my generation, but definitely I was something I was interested in at the time. But yeah, the that is jumping around a bit, but that does jump a little bit further forward. But I would say I actually kind of got deep into Radiohead later on.
Oh, okay, right on.
Yeah.
So when you were in Connecticut, and at what point did you decide that you wanted to go for Berklee? Like that was the move.
So I was, when I was in high school, we had this band called The Kind, KYND. I don't think you can find any evidence of it online, but actually I looked recently, and there's another band with that same name and spelling from around that same period that you can find online, but we're not them. But so we had this band, and it was so it was inspired by big thing in Connecticut or in New England in general in those days was like Grateful Dead and Fish. So we were definitely like highly influenced by those guys, as well as more like avant-garde jazz and things. But when the members of that band that we had in high school kind of all went up to Boston together to so that's when I went to Berklee with one of the other guys, and then the third member went to New England Conservatory. But yeah, I was I don't know. I got into that. I got into a thing where it was like the recruiter came from Berklee, came to our high school, and just like of course, again, this is like pre-internet and everything, so we just like handed out some really glossy brochures describing the schools with like these beautiful colors and things. I was like, oh, this is the place. But I had been going there. They had this like high school jazz competition that my high school jazz band would go to every year, and so I'd been going up for that. for all throughout high school, and was, I loved being a part of that.
How far is Boston from there? It's like 3 hours or so.
Yeah, 3 hours from where we were outside of New Haven, and so not too far. But yeah, and I remember actually visiting Berklee and hearing one of the big bands, like the student big bands, playing there, and was just like being particularly struck by the saxophone section in this band, and just like how warm it sounded to me. I was like, this place is amazing. So, so yeah, that ended up being the only school I applied to. I was like, this is the place for me. So yeah, it didn't last very long, but that is where I went at first.
Oh, did you not do the whole program?
No, I was there as with many Berklee students, I did not complete my degree. I was there officially for 1 year, and I stuck around unofficially for another year, still playing in ensembles and things, but not being officially enrolled. And then after that is when I transferred out to Naropa out there in Boulder.
So can you, do you want to talk about that experience at all? I mean, I'm curious because I was very close to going to that school.
Sure.
I like, the recruiters came, I played Inner Urge for them when I was in high school, and like I was accepted and all this, but I ended up going into a classical program instead. But I'm there's always that part of me where it's like, what would have it been like if I had gone to Berklee?
Yeah. I mean,
different hang.
Yeah, definitely. I like to talk about it. I mean, because I think the music school experience is always interesting to reflect on. But so again, to put this in context, you're like, I'm like 18 years old at the time, that kind of thing. So you're young and you're trying to figure things out. But and so I was kind of coming from this kind of big fish in a small pond situation there in Shoreline, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And, and so I got in there, and I mean, it's interesting to go to a place like Berklee for one thing, as I went in as a trombone player, and it's a big school, a lot of musicians, but not so many trombone players. So if you go in as a guitar or something like that, it's a very different experience, I think, than as trombone.
There's a lot of guitar players there, right?
Yeah. I mean, back then, I think even probably exponentially more now, but the kind of like, I'm probably exaggerating, but it seemed like there were like 12 trombone players and 2,000 guitar players, It seemed like that was more or less, the math. But, anyways, I was like, I had some nice opportunities to play in some cool, big bands. One that really made a big impression on me, or big impact, I would say, was playing in so there's lots of different big bands that like focus on different composers and things that they have there. And one of them was like the Thad Jones, Mel Lewis music, so if you're not familiar with that, if anybody listening isn't familiar, like Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, classic big band that still exists as like the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra that plays every Monday night at the Village Vanguard. But so this group would play that book, and it was directed by this guy, Ed Tomasi. And I felt like I learned a lot about just kind of like the spirit of the music and playing as being a part of that group. But, and a lot of another kind of formative experience for me at that time at the school was playing in, and this was kind of getting back to like the multi-instrumental thing, was like, taking a percussion class with a teacher named Saw Davis. And it was basically like a hand percussion for non-percussion majors type of class. But that was really my introduction to like the different rumba rhythms and things, and just playing congas and stuff. And I love that, that was a big deal for me to be a part of that.
That's cool.
But and another thing that happened when I was there was Kenny Werner came through, and he had just written the book Effortless Mastery.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Had just come out. And so he came to like give a presentation about his new book. And if, for anyone who might not be familiar with that book, it's kind of like bringing different mindfulness practices to being a musician and things, just to oversimplify it, but it was like, it really spoke to me, and I think it spoke to a lot of people at the school, because you're in this kind of pressure cooker environment. It can be pretty stressful. It's very competitive, and so it was just like, at least for me, it had this effect of kind of mellowing things out a little bit,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys had that experience, but I think, again, it's about the age that you're at, like 18, 19, 20 years old or whatever. And so for me at that time, it was like, you were just kind of this roller coaster experience emotionally. I mean, I think for people in general at that age, but as connected to like music practice, if you played well, you were psyched. If you played poorly, you were like super depressed, So it'd just be like these swings that would happen. For me, I had that experience. And that book kind of gave some perspective on that in a way that I found pretty helpful, and probably influenced my decision to go in a different direction, and head out to this Buddhist school I ended up at, Naropa.
Yeah. And, and I feel like that book was extremely important for a lot of people in a similar scene where, the chamber of self-loathing is such a, you're always in there, and you're always like comparing yourself, and unfortunately, I feel like social media has brought this back a little bit, but I remember,
little bit.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. But I feel like Effortless Mastery like really helped people recenter on why they would take up the practice of making music and improvising in the first place.
Would it be possible for you to, just because I haven't read the book, and I'm assuming that some of our listeners haven't read the book either, could you do like a little Cliff Notes version?
I mean, not very well. It's just been a long time since I read it, but just to give, I can kind of, go off the dome a little bit. Just kind of like the impressions that it made for me of just, so it does include a lot of kind of recorded guided meditations that he would, it's like where he's kind of like talking you through a process, but some things that he would like, there'd be specific practices or exercises that he would kind of guide you through, which would be like, as simple as like, what happens when you say, in the case of a trombone player, but it could be for any instrument, what happens physically, psychologically, everything else at that moment when you go to like pick up your instrument and like bring it to your face? Like, is there some kind of like tension creeping in? Like, what's going on that's going to like interfere with your freeness as a player, or however you want to put it, just to be like open to the moment and this kind of thing. So I think it's a lot of just like, it really does come down to just, definitely beyond music, of just like being present, physically centered and things like that. But then he's just like framing it specifically for jazz musicians in a way that spoke to me at that time. Definitely.
Yeah. And would you say that had a direct correlation with Naropa, or how did you even find Naropa, where you ended up going? Because that's to me, growing up in Denver, I knew about Naropa and Artlandia, of course, but that seems like an obscure school. So I'm curious about how you found that.
Yeah. All right. So backing up a little bit. So went back to when I was in high school in Connecticut, I had a very close friend / musician comrade, and we would play together a lot. His name, Chris Mathey, great trumpet player. Back then was, he was one of the people that really kind of got me into jazz and things like that. And he was, I think maybe he was a year older than me, something like that. But he eventually, when I was in school, and I think he was in college in New York, and he did a study abroad that was actually in Bali, but it was put on by Naropa. So that was kind of how I first heard about it, because he had done this study abroad. But then there's in Boston on Newbury Street, there's a cafe which is still there called Trident, a cafe bookstore. And I would, it's just a nice place to hang out, have brunch or whatever. But I would go there, and the place, I didn't really know this at the time, but it was, if I recall correctly, it was like started by former Naropa people or Shambhala people. Shambhala is kind of this like meditation organization that came out in Naropa. But they have these books there on display, and it kind of caught my eye. There was one in particular called Dharma Art. And so it's written by Chogyam Trungpa, who's the founder of Naropa, who's a Tibetan monk who came here in the 70s and started that school. And so this Dharma Art book was really just like a collection of his talks, transcribed talks, talking about the relationship of meditation and mindfulness with artistic practice. And that definitely, I bought that book and really spoke to me. And definitely connected to like the Kenny Werner vibe, the effortless mastery vibe. And also at the time I was, as I think people around that age at that time often were, was into like reading Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and stuff. And the Beats, they had a connection with, Allen Ginsberg was at Naropa. He was,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Very involved in starting the writing program there.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he was there. I mean, he was there for quite a while, but he died before I got out there.
Yeah.
But he was like probably one of the big names associated with that place over the years. And if you just to give a little tip to anybody listening who's interested in Allen Ginsberg. If you go to the Naropa website, I don't have the URL handy, but there's the Naropa library has a collection of digitized recordings of like, tons of stuff over the years, but like hundreds of Allen Ginsberg readings and collaborations with different musicians and things that I've enjoyed digging into.
What? Is that just open and available?
Yeah, it is.
What? Man.
It's really cool.
That is super cool.
That's a good tip.
That is beautiful. Thank you.
We can find the link later and put it in the show notes, as they say.
It'll go in the show notes. Beat us to it.
Yeah. So I when I was still in Boston, to mention a couple very important musicians to me at that time, not to jump ahead of that too much. There's a band called The Slip, which is kind of, they have recently did a little reunion tour, but they haven't been together for the past 10 years or so, and have since, like, there's a band called the Bar Brothers, which is currently active, and that's the Bar Brothers are 2/3 of The Slip. But anyway, those were musicians that I was close with back in those days, and we played together a lot. And there was also a great singer-songwriter named Leslie Helpert. And we would do stuff together. And Leslie and I both decided to go to Naropa from Boston. And so we kind of headed out there. And, and for me, I was actually at that time a little bit wanting to, after having the Berklee experience, wanting to put music on the back burner a little bit and kind of focus on some other things. So I wasn't going out there to be a music student per se.
Would you claim burnout at this point, or were you just like, I need to?
A little bit, I think from that Berklee experience of just being like a little fried on it. Yeah. And I was actually I had this band, I kind of skipped over this, I think, but the band I mentioned before, the band that we had in high school, we went up to Boston together. And that kind of...
The Kind,
yeah. And that morphed, that became this band up in Boston called the Miracle Orchestra, with the addition of a few other players up there. Yeah. And so we were playing around town and like playing, for instance, playing double bills with this band, The Slip, and things like that. And, it was a good band, good players, but I remember that I had this experience where it was like that band was getting ready to like tour around the area and do things like that at that time. And I personally was like, I don't know. Like, I felt like, I don't know if you guys can relate to this or not, but I felt like at the time I was like, I need to just practice more. I'm not ready to like go out on the road and do all this kind of thing. So I kind of pulled back. I basically left the group at that time because I felt like I just was like kind of dissatisfied with my own playing and that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
And you know, what I would probably do it differently in hindsight, but that was my state of mind at the time. But so I ended up going out to Naropa, and as a religious studies student, and where I was pretty interested in this whole Buddhism thing and meditation and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As I was introduced to with that book, Dharma Art, that I mentioned. But I was playing, and I was studying. I was taking private lessons at Art Landy out there. And
I would just like to say that growing up in Denver, Landy is an absolute legend, and I'm so glad that I get to interact with him because you bring him out here from time to time.
Yes, definitely.
I love Art Landy, and he also was deeply instrumental in shaping how I think about improvisation for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, being a young cat around someone like him, you can't really replicate that experience. So, but did you know that there was going to be a music aspect at the school? Like, did you know anything about Art Landy or the program? Or were you just going out there, like, cleaning the slate, and then things sort of serendipitously happen? I'm curious.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't really think I knew. I don't think I was familiar with art before then. I might have been, because back when I was in Boston, I was like pretty into buying ECM records.
Yeah, he's got a few.
He definitely does, and it was like for some reason you would just find a lot of like ECM cutout vinyl at the used record store. So I would buy tons of those things.
Yeah.
And so he had like the Red Lanta, that record.
Yeah. I still see
Jan
that all the time.
Yeah. So I think I might have not known that he was there, but when I got there, I was like, oh, that's that ECM guy, after I got out there, which was interesting for sure. But, so he was teaching at Naropa too, or at least, I don't know if he was like regular faculty or if he would just come in from time to time, but I did study with him some. Like, I had some classroom experiences with him there. And that's where, and I enjoyed taking lessons with him. He introduced me to, I never know how to pronounce the name correctly, but the Harmonic Experience, W.A. Mathau book. You guys know that book?
Crystal got me into that.
Who's like a Bay Area person.
The Harmonic Experience?
Yeah, it's a dense old head knocker of a textbook.
Tonal harmony from its natural origins.
Yeah, it's a really cool book. I recommend checking it out. Art introduced me to that. Art had been a student of his, because Art was originally Art lived in the Bay Area back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so I think he studied with him at that time, and so he was still interested in those ideas. There's like harmonic lattices and things, and Art hipped me to that.
That's interesting that Art would be, because playing of course there's people like Chris Brown where you tune your own piano and do your own things, but Art, I've never connected those particular dots. Mm-hmm. So.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you just said. Tune your own piano?
Well, a lot of what I understand about the harmonic experience is that, people who are interested in just intonation take, a lot of what they've learned and how they implement their intonations comes from this book. This is like one of the standard textbooks, as far as I understand. And, Chris Brown, who is, Bay Area contemporary, well-known composer, was a teacher at Mills, and does a lot of his own piano tunings for his pieces. That's someone where I'm like, okay, cool. Art Landy's a pianist, but I don't see him as someone who like does his own intonations and his own tuning on the piano when he plays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it wasn't so much that side of it, but it was more about like the first part of that book is really nice, is about like singing over drones just kind of hearing pure overtones and things like that.
Oh, okay.
And, so that was the piece of it that kind of connected to what we were getting into. But, and so Art would do things like we would go on listening walks, which is another thing that the person who wrote that book talks about, which is just like, walking around and listening, and maybe interacting with what you hear in different ways, things like this. So it was definitely a nice contrast to the Berklee experience, which is so
certainly. And just so everyone knows, Naropa is in Boulder, right?
Beautiful Boulder, Colorado. Yep.
Very, very beautiful place in the world. It's so cool.
Yeah.
The Flatirons and.
But that's so the Naropa is where maybe on the first or second day I got there, I heard somebody playing the drums in one of the music rooms, and I was like, let me check this out. Let's see who this is. I poked my head in, and there's this young fella with big head of dreadlocks. It turned out to be my good friend Jason Levis, who
Levis.
Yeah.
He had dreadlocks?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, he definitely did. He was
That's amazing.
He was big into reggae, and he was like kind of into from his Berklee days of I won't tell his life story, but he was deep into it at that time, and so we connected right away, and we didn't actually play a ton of music when I was out there because, like I said, it wasn't my main focus. wasn't really playing. We did play some. He was a music student, and I played as part of his senior recital or whatever it was called.
Yeah,
that was kind of a memorable experience. But that is where we connected and became housemates and things like that.
Did you transition into becoming a music student, or did you graduate with religious studies?
I graduated as a religious studies. Yep, that's my degree is in religious studies. Wow. And at Naropa, it's like it's this Buddhist. It started by a Buddhist monk, but it's like it's not just a Buddhist school, but it has kind of this contemplative aspect to whatever you're doing there. This like kind of mindfulness and meditation practice and things like that built into the curriculum. And so I really enjoyed it, but it was more like it wasn't the kind of dry religious studies you might find at more of a traditional university. It was like you would really kind of get in there and see what the different traditions were like. And I was, again, at that age, early 20s kind of a thing. It was a powerful experience personally to go through that.
It's beautiful. Would you do that through practice? Like actually, was it just strictly Buddhist, or would you actually practice other religions? I'm just curious,
That's a good question. I mean, because I've never, I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but there was I think it's more just like with the meditation coming out of that they would teach there, which definitely comes out of Buddhism. I think it's more like the psychological side of things rather than religious per se. Just being able to like be aware of your thoughts and surroundings and things. And so then the way I think about it is it's like that's not specific to any tradition, although there are, each different religions have different kind of contemplative practices, they'll use different language around it and have different like symbolism and things. But but that kind of moment of just like sitting and focusing on the breath and that kind of stuff, that definitely like, transcends different traditions. And
oh, interesting. Were you chanting?
There is some of that. Yeah, there was some of that. But especially there would be like certain days where they would do it where it'd be kind of like more chant oriented. And I enjoyed that. You can really like get some good energy going that way as an individual and as a group. But a lot of it was just, sitting quietly. It was amazing just to have like you could just imagine like a college class where the first 30 minutes are just spent sitting quietly, focusing on your breath. It's just very different from a lot of situations.
That's hard for me to imagine.
That is hard for me to imagine as well.
Wow.
I mean, it's just, you do something like that and then the conversations that follow just feel more significant somehow, Just more like you're just there. You're not like totally.
That type of thing has always been very difficult for me. I have an easily wandering mind.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, does it come easily for you?
I think it leans a little bit towards the natural side for me, just my kind of like personality type and stuff like that, just to be still and things. But still, it's the idea of being like having a restless mind and things like that's definitely universal. And it's like, that's not meant to be like, that's not like a bad thing. It's just like, you just let that be there and just notice it. And, it just can be, it can kind of, the practice can kind of, that's not for everyone, but I think it can be helpful to anyone, regardless of like how fast or slow your mind tends to run.
Yeah. Do you still practice? Are you still meditating?
Not regularly. It's always that thing like, I should get back into that. But at that age, it like, it was like it made a big difference and laid a kind of a good foundation. Actually, I would say for like certain practices, like I don't necessarily sit every day for a certain amount of time or things like that. But there are certain practices from that have stuck with me through the years, that have to do with kind of like processing certain difficult emotions and things like that. You're just like, okay, you have a framework for how to deal with it that you can move through and not get stuck. Like that's
like where you can observe an emotion for what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So some idea of like meditation in daily life, with whatever's going on, which, nowadays there's a lot to get stressed out about, but if you have something that you can like, some kind of foundation that you can come back to, it's definitely helpful. It's helpful.
Yeah. A framework like that. That's beautiful. Man.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't the technical practice of focusing on your breath be helpful as a trombonist?
Absolutely. And I mean, I would say that it's totally, I mean, and that doesn't have to be a meditation thing. That's like, I've recently been introduced to some Alexander technique kind of stuff, which deals with similar things around posture and, just kind of a relaxed setting as I'm noticing I'm slumping right now. So I'm going to fix up my posture a little bit. But, and just noticing like I was playing a concert last night and you're just kind of, you're under the lights and but if you have like that framework of just kind of like, oh, I'm noticing certain tension creeping in that is interfering with my breathing, and you can kind of like release all of that and just come back to the moment and like let things be loose and open, especially as an improviser where you don't want to just like put the blinders on. You want to be relaxed and be able to hear what's going on around you and all that kind of stuff.
Being present in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be, I don't know, it's sort of funny, like to be thrown into the loop of that and be thinking about whether or not you're present while you're supposed to be improvising. And then like there are times when I just have to stop playing for a minute and like let everything like come in and then play again. Just give it all space, because I realize like I've like disconnected.
Definitely. I can relate to that a lot, and it's like,
yeah. What is actually the balance, would you say? Like, how much can improvisation be just turning on the faucet, not making fully or not making conscious choices, I guess, as much as that is possible, versus like 100% choice making, listening, thinking about what you're going to do.
That's a deep question.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think? What do you think, Bob?
Well, I would say that it depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you can kind of mix both of the two approaches. But what would you say?
Well, I mean, I do wonder sometimes when, there's like that concept of flow, right? that book and just the concept in general of just like being in a flow state as an improviser. And it's almost like a trance state or something like that. And where it's like, you're almost just not there. And it's just like this music is just pouring out of you or whatever. And I don't, I'm not sure what that is. It's something I've been curious about. Like, is that just like a particular brain state, certain brain waves coming to the fore as opposed to others where it's not so much about choice making, but it's just kind of happening, And I have a musician friend who some years ago I was talking to about this with. It's just coming to mind for me, but where it was this idea of like, he was saying that as a soloist or as an improviser, it's like, my thing is I just need to get out of the way. That's what it's all about. As a player, I just need to get out of the way so that I can let the music come through me, that kind of idea, which I thought was kind of a profound idea, like where is it coming from, this thing that's going through you, it's kind of a deep thing to meditate on, but yeah. And I think that, especially, I think when I was younger, going back to high school and college and things and getting into improvisation and not necessarily at that time being super well versed in theory and harmony and things like that, but very connected to the emotional side of the music, that it was much more about this thing of just like letting it happen. And it was all about just like kind of this raw emotional expression. I wouldn't necessarily understand like how to play on changes or things of that nature, how to like play over chord progressions and stuff.
Yeah.
But then, but feeling like you could really just like put your heart into it, And so it was like, you're coming from this kind of raw emotional place. And, and then later as I would like learn a lot more about the kind of the grammar of the music, if you will, and how things connect and how to think about different scales and chords and things, it's like at that point you can have much more control over what you're doing and how to structure things in a way that's logical and stuff like that. But potentially disconnect a little bit from the kind of more raw emotional side of things, so it's like everything makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily have the same impact, just like the same kind of power, so that's something that I think about and like trying to find that balance of like, okay, you have these tools now, but like, it's not just about, kind of painting between the lines or whatever. It's like, you still want to be able to like tap into that initial spark, kind of like pure emotional side of things. And then hopefully use those skills in service of that,
Interesting.
I have perhaps a different perspective on this, just because some of the music that I play, some of the Afro-Cuban music styles, take rumba, for example. Like if you're playing a drum part in rumba and you are, there's improvisation that's kind of built into the structure of the music, and it's not like you're taking a solo. You're in conversation with the other drums and the singer and the dancer, and it depends on what's all going on, of course, but if I find myself, I'm listening to all this stuff and paying attention to what's going on, and then I make a decision about what I'm going to do, and then like, oh, this kind of works if I do this. By the time I think about that and do that, the moment's already passed.
Yeah.
And if I turn that off and I'm still listening to and paying attention to what's going on, but I am not, I'm just letting my hands do the things that they already know how to do, the stuff that is practiced and it's already in my muscle memory. Ideally I've practiced enough and my hands do kind of know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not trying to invent a new language, or I'm not trying to be creative or fancy. I'm just speaking the language that I already know what to say. It shortens, I think, the improvisational response time. It makes the group sound more cohesive, I think.
Yeah. So does that, when you're playing Roomba, for instance, is that something where, like, how long is it usually? Is it kind of, are you in it for a while usually? Is that kind of the standard that you're kind of there for an extended period of time, or does it vary?
Do you mean like this improvisational moment?
Well, just the overall piece. Like, are you there? You start the piece, and how long does it go on for? Roughly speaking.
There's a joke about this, actually. So someone said to me, more or less, you know when the Roomba started, but you don't know when it's going to stop. Mm-hmm. So, the lesson there is conserve your energy, or, don't go wild right off the bat, just play responsibly.
Don't blow your chops. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's generally speaking true, unless it's a strictly formal setting. Mm-hmm. But so they can go for, in most cases, they can go for basically any length of time.
And so some of it might be, I mean, I don't know too much about that whole tradition, so that's why I'm asking, but just I'm just kind of imagining what it might be like. You're probably there's probably at different times, different drummers are more in the forefront than others, and at other times you're kind of hanging back and playing,
Yeah, there's a form to the music that emerges over time but I think more importantly, there are different roles that people fill, and this, of course, affects the level of free improvisation. But even if you switch this to like a jazz context, like if you imagine you're playing a rhythm instrument, like you're playing drums or keys or whatever, mm-hmm. and someone else is soloing, and you're accompanying, and how much attention are you paying to the details of what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. It blips in and out, like in some moments you'll be completely present, and then some moments you'll be completely overly aware of what you are playing, in my experience. But listening to you two talk about this, like it makes me think about like the cool thing that I've come across in the Bay that I think will probably come up in the music that we're going to be listening to, but like sort of the start and depart. Like you have the material, and then there's improvisation. It's not necessarily over the changes.
Start and depart.
Yeah, it's what I like to call it. But
I like that.
So in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been shedding jazz more just to shed jazz, and it's its own practice, and that includes the blues and bebop, and they're their own languages, and like it's its own practice, but it feels completely different for me than improvisation just based on specific material. Like I love exploring harmony and improvising within harmonic restraints or constraints like that, but it feels completely different. And so, based on what you're saying, Bob, for me, it's just like there are blips where it's like you're completely at one with what's going on with the performance, and then there are moments where I'm like so aware of a specific voicing that I might be trying to do on the vibraphone, and I have to like, again, like I said earlier, just stop playing and like back out for a minute.
Yeah.
And listen.
Yeah, I personally get myself into trouble with thinking that I can do something that I can't necessarily do, or I get an idea and it just doesn't, I can't pull it off or whatever.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the what you guys make me think about right now? Another super formative record for me back in the day, high school and so forth, was like the Miles Davis, like the 1960s Miles Davis quintet. Those records, like, I don't know if you know these records or not, but Four and More and My Funny Valentine in particular, like these 2 live albums, or it was one concert.
I don't know them personally.
that's a wonderful opportunity for me to talk about one of my favorite records a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and just that band in general. So just to say who was in it at the time. So this is like mid 60s. I think that record's from 64, but it's just before Wayne Shorter joined the band. So the lineup is,
Coleman.
yes, George Coleman, saxophonist, Herbie Hancock, piano, Ron Carter, bass, Tony Williams.
Sorry, what's the album you're talking about again?
It was split up into two records. It's one concert, the two records. Now it's probably a combined CD set or something, but it was My Funny Valentine and Four and More. Those are the two names of them.
Wait, was Four and More recorded live?
Yes.
What?
Definitely.
Huh.
And they're from this same concert.
Okay.
And that, that band was so influential on, lots of people, but me. That was, again, one of these kinds of tapes that I would listen to over and over again in my car and stuff like that. But so the way that rhythm section would operate is that, and this is something that you really hadn't heard much before that time, was like, maybe they'd be swinging and playing, just going along, and then Tony Williams, the drummer, would just stop playing. He would just drop out, and the whole thing would just open up. The music would just like become. They would go from this intense, hard swinging thing, and then it would just become like very atmospheric because the drums just weren't there anymore. Or at certain times, piano player Herbie Hancock would just lay out, and so they had that kind of like freedom in terms of the orchestration of the group. It wasn't like, this is what the rhythm section does. At any moment, certain instruments could come and go. And inspired by, Tony Williams was like 17, 18 years old at the time. He was a total freak,
Yeah.
Like changed the direction of the music as a teenager. It was crazy. But, and so that thing of just talking about how to take that moment, like Mark, you were saying before, just like, I just need to stop, just kind of regroup.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's where they were coming from or not, but it had that. It was just a new sound, and it really made an impression on me too at that time, and that's something that I've thought about a lot over the years, of just like, even though like the music as you're playing or improvising kind of like take on this momentum, and you feel like you're on this train that's not going to stop, you actually can stop. It might feel like you can't, but you can, and oftentimes like that can just add like such an element of like just openness or drama or whatever it might be in that particular moment. That's been my experience of like, oh wow, it's like some the cliche is like, it's as much what you don't play as what you do, all that kind of stuff like that.
And it also gets other people listening as well.
Mm-hmm.
The band members, they're just like, okay, so this is atypical. This is stopped, and same with the audience as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just stop entirely, that's what I love about the Woods residency. But anyway.
Art, our dear friend who we've mentioned before, Art Landy, he had this nice lesson that has another one of these things that he said that's always stuck with me over the years, where he was like, he wanted you to listen to the band, like when you're playing, he wanted you to listen to the whole band as if you were the one making all the sounds, so it wasn't like 5 different people or whatever. It was just you, so in that sense, it's, you're hearing it's, and I think it was just like an exercise to get you out of your own little head trip, of what just you were playing, think about the totality of it, but don't hear it. It's not just about, well, you're going to like respect this person. No, it's all you. Like everything that's happening is you, So it was just a way of kind of like flipping a certain head trip where you just get kind of like too hung up on your own stuff, I think.
That's interesting. I mean, I assume teaching there that Art was involved in the Buddhist practice as well, correct?
I don't really think so, actually. I mean, so there's a book that came out recently that he co-wrote with Mark Miller.
Okay.
And Mark was, I think at that time, the head of the music program at Naropa, great saxophone player and woodwind player. And he was like deep into Zen Buddhist practice. And so they co-wrote this book, and and Mark was really bringing the specific kind of Buddhist piece of it. And Art was just bringing the artishness of it, which is just like very much his thing,
Yeah.
his own thing, And it's got some of that component to it, but I don't think he's just somebody that wouldn't like belong to any particular group in that way. I think,
Okay.
he's just doing his own thing.
Well, I mean, the whole thing about that too is like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's not such a big deal, but thinking about like, where does ego fit in if you're like a creative person and practicing Buddhism with, potentially enlightenment where you're trying to let go of all that. But I think that was more what I was concerned about when I was younger and first exploring Buddhism. But I don't think those two things conflict anymore so much. But anyway. Yeah.
So
right.
how did you decide to move to the Bay Area?
So I graduated from Naropa, and then it was time to decide what to do next. I was ready to leave Boulder. It was beautiful there, but it felt a little white bread, to be honest, and not a lot of diversity going on there. But so I, which I missed, from when I was younger, and so then as I was thinking about, I was thinking about going back to Boston, where I still knew a lot of people and things like that. But then the Bay Area, my sister was living out here at the time, my older sister. So that was one connection, but also my good pal who I mentioned earlier, Jason Levis, who was originally from the Bay Area, had moved back. He was a year ahead of me in school, and he had moved back after he graduated. And so I was talking to him about what might be going on. And we had kept in touch since he had left, and he at that time, this is like 2000, is that when I graduated? I think, 2000. And he said, there's this place out here called the Jazz School. You might be able to get a job. That's what he said to me. And that school had just started in 97. So it was pretty new, just in a small building. And for some reason I was like, at that age, you're just like very confident about things. Go out there and get a job at this place called the Jazz School. Not knowing anything about it or having any connection to it, But so for whatever reason, I think I wasn't super psyched about going back to the New England weather. So we decided to settle on beautiful San Francisco, California. And
did you move straight to Piedmont?
No, landed in Berklee.
Okay.
And that's where I was for a while. We did check out the Jazz School as I mentioned, first as
you attended it?
Yeah, as playing in ensembles and things, and kind of worked my way into that. But yeah.
Right on. So there's one thing that we kind of skipped over that I kind of wanted to ask you about. You had mentioned to us in your email that in high school, you were writing tunes. Have you been writing the whole time? What were you writing back then? And were you writing a lot?
I'm not sure. Did I don't know if I mentioned anything particular in that email or not.
You were in Connecticut, you said.
Yeah. So, I mean, the band that we had, The Kind, we were writing all, it was mostly original music ultimately, and things that we would write together. Kind of coming from this jam band vibe. I've definitely written music all along. And combination, I've always been interested in writing music, but also playing other people's music, whether it be, what we call covers, or just playing in bands with other people who write music, things like that. But I want to double back actually a little bit now that you're taking us back to Connecticut, because there was something that was very important at that time that we didn't mention that I do want to get on the record. Which was these particular jam sessions that I would go to when I was in high school in Connecticut. So I was growing up in this shoreline town called Guilford, Connecticut, which is just outside of New Haven. And I would go a few different people, but in particular, a good friend of mine named Bill Carbone and I, musician friend, we would go into New Haven to these jam sessions a lot. And there was a place called Malcolm's Jazz Cafe. And it was, it was definitely a black cultural space is how I would put it. It was a club where it was mostly black musicians. And somewhat there were these brothers who were kind of famous in that area, the Busters, Eddie and Bobby Buster, both keyboardists, and had this kind of like lineage going back, playing with Sonny Stitt and different people. And they each of them had like a different jam session in town that they would run. And at Malcolm's, one of these guys would run the session, older player. And it was interesting, like stylistically. It would be a combination of straight ahead jazz, playing standards, and then also kind of like smooth jazz R&B on the same session. That was just kind of like the vibe of like, it was mostly a black crowd, and that was the music that was of interest, So you would go from playing like a tune like Stella by Starlight or Jazz Standard, and then it would go right into Grover Washington, Mr. Magic, or things like that. And it was just like like it wasn't like these two separate things. Like that was just like the sound of what people were playing, what they were into. So that was very influential, and like I kind of connected to a certain, that was probably my first experience with like really basically, we talk about jazz being black music, but that was like the actual first experience. Like, I was like previously playing in like the school jazz band and things, and that was not a black space, it was like a suburban white type space primarily. And this idea of black space and white space, like that was something that I, if you guys have read that book, How to Be Anti-Racist, that was something that he talks about in there that definitely was interesting to me, of like that, like what that means to have like, what is it, like a black space or a white space? It's really about like the percentages of people involved in like a particular venture, So if you have like more than 50% of the, it becomes a white space versus a black space, And so that's kind of how I'm using that term. But so it's not like it was all one thing or all the other, but in terms of just like the majority of what's going on there, culturally it goes in a certain direction. And so that experience, going to Malcolm's, and there are other clubs like that in New Haven, it was like, it meant a lot to me, and I learned a lot from that, And it was kind of that old school thing of just going to the session. I was pretty young. I was like 16 years old, and I don't actually know if I was legally allowed to be in there or not, but, we went, we played, and it was kind of like it was very supportive, but also tough. You would get the feedback. People would let you know. If you were doing it or not.
Yep.
But yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And well, dude, how do you personally deal with that? Because we've talked about this with some other people in the past, but I'm curious about how do you personally deal with, because the sessions can be tough sometimes, like if it's like, even if it's supportive, if it's a cutting vibe, and also culturally, like how did that land for you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's, for those who might not be familiar with the culture of the jazz jam session, it's like it'll be in some public space, and there'll be a house band, and you show up, and if you're whatever instrument you play, and you go up and say you'd like to play, and sit in and play it on a tune and take a solo or whatever. And it's usually pretty open, but then it's like, depending on the setting, it might feel more supportive or less supportive. It might be more challenging or less challenging. But I find that it can definitely be intimidating depending on the context, how comfortable you are, like if you know the people or not, things like that. But every time and some sessions are better than others, because you never know who you're going to end up playing with once you get up there. There's just going to be some sort of random combination of players, but sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's problematic, just like people.
Sometimes it's a mess, but
I love it. It's like, I find it so inspiring most of the time. Sometimes it's a drag for different reasons, but most of the time of just like going up and playing, and, as a player, you don't have total control over the situation. You know, that's what's so different from like having your own band and being able to like pick the tunes and know what's what. Like you're going to go up there and you might not be the one who calls the tune, you know, and it might be a tune somebody else calls and you kind of know it, you know, or they play it and it's a singer and they want to do it in a different key than you're familiar with and things like that. Mm-hmm. But you just get that, you just do your best and whatever you've practiced will hopefully kind of see you through. But then for me, one of the things that I find so inspiring about that experience is like, you just instantly know what you need to work on next, you know, after going through that. Yes. You're like, okay, cool. I know I'm going to go home. I know I need to practice, you know.
Big truth.
Oh my God. That's so, big truth. That's big truth. So true. So true. And, you know, some of those lessons land hard for me personally, because I'm a softie. I'm a sensitive cat. Uh-huh. So like the sessions, like it'd be rough, man. You know, like,
yeah,
like coming away from some of them just feeling like I'm not going to play again, or, you know, that kind of thing. But I think
it's all about the mindset too, you know, that you come into it with. Because I remember having some of those experiences too of just being like, you know, demoralized. But
yeah.
It can be but it's one of those things that you can't. There's no substitute for it, you know? So it's like, I mean, of course you don't need to participate in that culture at all. A lot of people don't and do wonderful things in music, but it is something where it's like, you know, if anybody's listening who might be interested in this kind of thing, it's like, even if it's like you go and you fail, and if you feel that you yourself have, you know, folded or whatever the situation was, you got to come back the next time, you know, and like the more that you keep doing it, the more confidence you build, and that can just like transform somebody's playing. Like it's unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Like when I see like a young player come through who's like real green or whatever, and they're just like, you know, they don't really know, and but then they keep coming like week after week, and you get beyond that thing of like really caring what people think about your playing. You're just like committed to the process, you know, just come back again. You played. Now you know what you need to practice. Go home, come back again, you know, keep going through that. It's just like, it can be totally like transformative.
Gym. Yeah. It's like consistency and just also knowing like what tunes people are going to be calling, you know? I mean, that's a big part of it too. Like that's a hard thing for me is like, I know the tunes that I know. Mm-hmm. And some of them are something that like no one's calling Pinocchio or something like, you know what I mean? Like, but
this is all funny for me because I just started going to the Bakersfield Jazz Jam.
Oh yeah.
And I've been going every week since I found out about it. And it's been pretty interesting. Like I've been to a lot of jams that have been kind of high level. And, you know, obviously I've been to a ton of Roombas, which are very similar. But, you know, in most cases, a Roomba is going to be, you know, a much more cutthroat environment than most jazz jams, at least. Like there's more machismo. Like if you're new, they'll yell at you just because you're new or because they don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. So the jazz jam is almost welcoming, you know, compared to that. But it is interesting to see what's going on here in Bakersfield. And the jazz jam, like that environment, and the Roomba as well, they do offer something invaluable that you can't really get from a lot of other situations, which is like a community, like a real sense of community, and like you get to know all the people in the scene, and you get to hear what's going on and stuff like that.
Totally.
So have you been playing, Bob? I'm curious.
Yeah. I've been playing
drums.
Yeah, I played drums. I've been playing drums, but it's funny. I've been practicing piano over the last year, and you know, I would like to play piano eventually there, but you know, at the moment, I don't really know so much of the repertoire. Like I could only play a couple tunes for sure, and you know, once you get up there, you know, basically anything could be called. And it's funny, actually, last week someone did call Giant Steps, which is such a it's such a funny tune. Like it's one of my favorite tunes. I love Giant Steps, but it's like the type of thing that you would call to either to show off or like try to give someone else a hard time.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of dynamics at play with these things. One of the things I love about it is that meeting new players. It's a great place to do that, you know. So yes, connecting with people that you already know for sure, but also being introduced to new players on the scene. I love that.
I think the regularity of the jam is what really makes the community aspect of it successful.
Mm.
Yep.
So just before we depart the topic, what sessions are you currently a part of or attending or are aware of, or right now I'm just curious.
There's a car alarm behind me. I don't know if you can hear that or not. It's just distracting me for a second there. But it was there's a session that we are sponsoring. The CJC, California Jazz Conservatory, is running at Bobby G's over there in downtown Berkeley. That's been happening on Tuesday nights. It's on hiatus for the holiday, but I've been going to that I'm not actually running it, but I've been going to it every week, and it's run, the musical director of it is one of our faculty members, John Gove, great trombone player.
Yeah.
And then it'll be students from our degree program in the house band in the rhythm section. You know, and they're good players, good young players. And so that's been cool. But another great session that I enjoy a lot is the over at the Artichoke not far from where I live, over on Telegraph Avenue.
Yep.
That Tony Peebles runs usually on Sunday nights. Great session, fun.
Yeah. And sometimes
these are both just straight ahead jazz.
Yep.
Yeah. Vado will sometimes have his vibes over there, which is always lovely. There's also, the other one I'd like to shout out real quick is Doors That Only Open in Silence at the TAC that Jacob Felix Hewley runs. Also on Sundays, I believe.
Free improvisation, right?
Free improvisation, but it's the same type of community, and just like I've seen over time, people really grow and flourish and like see themselves becoming confident, full-on improvisers.
Can I do a shout out to? I might have mentioned this on the last podcast, but a shout out to one of my favorite sessions of all time, the old session that Sam Ossobot was running.
Oh yeah, you did. I do believe we did talk about this.
The 355, where it was this this combination of straight ahead jazz and free improvisation.
That was
like
so
from
cool.
one piece to the next, and somebody should do that again.
Get on that, somebody.
Yeah. It was.
No, let's do it.
So hip.
Let's make it happen.
The change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. It kind of harkens back to that Anthony Braxton experience, in a way.
Yeah.
I think that's why it felt meaningful to me.
Have you guys ever been to the blues night at Eli's?
No.
Well, I would recommend checking it out at least once.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, the Eli's on San Pablo?
Yeah, they have a blues night. It's either Monday or Tuesday. I don't remember.
That place is intense.
Yes. So I should mention that it's not overtly an open jam. It seems to be a jam for those that are, part of the community or in the know.
Okay.
And it when you go there, you can see that there's a whole set of conventions and a whole repertoire that you would need to know. But it's definitely worth checking out as like a gathering place.
Right on. Well, speaking of what's going on in the Bay, let's dig into all the music that you've been involved in. Let's start listening a little bit. There's so much. And would you suppose that a married couple would be like the correct place to kind of start? I mean, this involves Levis and
yeah. I mean, chronologically, certainly, that was really the first band that I had out here in the Bay Area. and started pretty shortly after moving out here. In early 2000s, so it's going back a ways, and it was so that was the band with Jason Levis, who we mentioned, and then Lisa Mizzacappa, who is also somebody that I've worked with a ton in lots of different projects over the years.
Yeah.
But first in that group, and then also.
Oh, wow. So that was at you meeting Lisa was through that group, or probably through Jason, right?
We had, we wanted to make this group. It was with Jason and the saxophone player, Jonah Minton. And Lisa was about to move to town from New York, and, to go to school out here. And or do her master's, I think. And it was, word was spreading that there's this new bass player coming to town. And we needed the bass player. We're like, I bet we should get her before she gets too busy,
Yeah. I was listening to your interview with Duo B.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about that a little bit there. So how would you describe the music of this group?
Well, it was a combination of things that I think was fruitful, which was at the time I personally was pretty interested in this idea of improvising on rock and pop tunes and folk kind of harmony and stuff like that. And so that was kind of some of the element that I was bringing to it in terms of my arrangements and things. But then Jason, at the time, he was studying composition. Both he and Lisa were involved with studying with Henry Threadgill when he was at UC Berklee around that time. And so I think Henry's compositions definitely influenced some of what Jason was doing in those days and some of the things that he was bringing into the group. And that's much more of thorny, angular stuff, not so much from the folkish vibe that I was into. Yeah. And so it was kind of a combination of those two things. But yeah, the group itself was bass drums and trombone and saxophone. And it was I think we also thought of ourselves at the time as having this kind of somewhat antagonistic relationship with the jazz tradition. Somewhat coming from that. I just remember that being, we were definitely improvising. And I think if you listen back to it, it sounds like jazz, but it was just because of the instrumentation and but in terms of relating to some kind of jazz tradition, there was a little bit of a, friendly antagonistic relationship, I would say.
Yeah, but I feel this is cool to hear about, especially, with you and Levis and Lisa, and the genesis of something that I feel like is absolutely 100% now just an established part of the tradition in the Bay as well, Also, I don't think that I knew that Threadgill taught at Berklee.
Yeah.
And that they had studied under Threadgill. That's pretty heavy.
I missed out on it personally, but yeah, they were there and definitely involved with that. It's a regular thing, but kind of learning his music and learning the kind of way that his very idiosyncratic method of composition.
Yeah. So we have a couple things lined up to listen to. One is Allegretto, and I have a personal question about that. So that's a Shasti arrangement, right?
Yes.
Did you arrange that, or where did that one come from?
That's Jason Levis arranged.
From the Eighth Quartet, I believe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And he's our resident classical guy, so he would bring some of that element to it. So yeah, he arranged something from the Shostakovich string quartet for us to mess around with.
That's what Allegretto is?
Yeah. It's Shasti.
Oh.
And then I mean the arrangement of Looks Like a Pie is, that's a tricky tune.
Yeah, what is going on there?
I've had to take a stab at that. I can send you a score, Bob. It's kind of rugged.
That's a Jason composition as well, and he was it's still actively played. He's got a few of these kind of books, Jason Levis standards that are still played after all these years. But yeah,
where does Jason live? Is he in the Bay?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
He's in up there in Kensington. and we still play together a lot.
I have a band with him as well, Bob. Lost Shapes.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Oh,
I
right.
think I've told you about that.
Yeah. Well,
There you
should
have
we
it.
listen to? I really really like Allegretto.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
All right.
Shasta.
Okay, so this is Allegretto by Married Couple.
Yes, I love your playing on that. First of all,
Thank you.
I really do. The playfulness, and just thinking about it. I love that string quartet, but it seems like y'all had little pieces of the material with which you could play, and you were interacting together. Is that right? You kind of had like a head in and a head out that was from the material, and then you had like cells maybe that you can mess with, or
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly all the details, but that was a lot of the approach that we would take as a group. Was like there would be kind of like a score that we would all be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Not the original Shostakovich, but something that in this case Jason had come up with that was derived from that, and then we would just play around with it, And so we had this concept of like, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but it was something that we would say in those days, which was all actual playing voids all arrangement. I think that was the phrase. But it was like we would rehearse all kinds of stuff, but then when it would come time to play, it was just like do something, So there would be a lot of like choices made in the moment, And so it just kind of led to some.
Oh, I love that.
I think probably we probably did like a couple different, 2 or 3 different takes of that tune that were probably completely different on that recording session. But it was just like
it felt so light and beautiful and playful. I mean, the material itself is like really intense,
mm-hmm.
coming from that particular quartet. And yeah, it was so cool. I love the choices that you were making with I guess, what was it with the
plunger mute? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I mean, listening back to that, I haven't heard it in a while, but it was like, that's definitely, you're hearing one of my strong influences from my early days as an aspiring trombone player, Ray Anderson.
Oh, okay. I don't know that name.
Great trombone player, kind of, definitely has like that playfulness to his playing and using the plunger in this kind of like very in your face way that, spoke to me. So I think you can hear some of that influence if you're familiar with Ray's playing. Yeah.
I mean, I'll look it up, but
yeah. And actually he was in one of the classic, Braxton groups back in the 80s, but he has a lot of his own albums too that were I still love, but he was a big thing for me back in my high school days and stuff. But, and I'll say that album that's from, by a married couple called Looks Like a Pie to Me, is, you cannot find it online. But
why not, by the way? Both Bob and I have notes on that. Why is that not released?
Well, I mean, first of all, so we made the record before there was the kind of regular digital distribution and stuff that you have these days. Back in the day, we would sell the CD on CD Baby and stuff.
Yeah.
But so it is a CD that exists in a box in my closet, and if anyone wants a copy, hit me up. But I mean, it was a thing where like there's a lot of there's a lot of music. There's a lot of music that we arranged on there, other people's music that hasn't really gone through the proper like rights clearance kind of stuff to be like digitally distributed and everything. But maybe someday. But yeah, I still have a box of them and for the CD cats. Yeah.
And so you said that this group kind of broke up when who moved away?
Yeah, Jonah Minton, our saxophone player. That was around 2004, I think. He headed down to LA to pursue further studies. So yeah, that was pretty much before that time we had been playing a lot in the Bay Area. But yeah, that was, and we played from time to time after that, but mostly it was done when he split town. But I certainly continued to work with Lisa and Jason in a number of other situations.
When you first moved to the Bay Area, did you immediately start playing with all different kinds of people? Because you play with all, you play with all kinds of different people all the time. And I was just curious if it took a while to build up the network or if you kind of fell right into it or how that went for you.
Think back for a second. I was, as I mentioned, Jason was somebody that I was connected with already from college. So that was a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing, with some other things that he was involved with at that time. But I guess it probably took a little while, but for some reason, as I mentioned, it was like before when I was at Naropa, I wasn't really like, music was a little bit on the back burner. But for whatever reason, when I moved out to the Bay Area, it was like, that's when things kind of clicked in. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I just want to play, Yeah. And it was just kind of like built from there ever since. But so I moved out here and it was my early 20s. And so I was definitely like checking out a lot of different players and doing different things. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it was, I do remember like early on somebody, as I was like trying to meet musicians and things out here, somebody saying, well, what you should do is you should like just go to these different shows and try to sit in with the bands and things. And I got into that for a while just as a way to meet players, of just like show up with my horn had different gigs and things. And like the last set of the night, just like, you guys mind if I play a tune? So there would be some of that going on, which, I recommend for the young players out there. If you want to break into the scene, just like get out there and, be respectful. Don't just like get up on stage or anything, but try to meet people, and try to connect in that way.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's a delicate balance of having the guts and the skill set to sit in with another group.
Yes.
And socially as well, so they don't feel like you're intruding on them.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain gigs. I mean, when I first moved out here, I was playing regularly at the Layover, and that seems like a completely appropriate place where if you were just hanging with the horn and it's like the last set, it's late enough, you'd be like, yeah, come on up.
Mm-hmm.
Let's play. I feel like certain venues that would be extremely awkward, but
yes, totally. I mean, it's a balance for sure. You don't want to just, because I've seen it go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Yes. But there is I don't know if you guys know Jazz Mafia and like Adam Thies and that whole scene. But they had a gig at this club called the Black Cat, which is not the Black Cat that exists now, but it used to be there in North Beach. They had a regular gig there, and that was one of the spots where I sat in early on and kind of like, it was a good place to connect with a number of different players, just by bringing the trombone, which is, Adam is a fellow trombone player, so he was nice enough to let me play. So
yeah. Well, man, can we? How far ahead of it is it if we talk about Long Tone Sally? That's more recent, right?
That's very recent.
Oh, okay. Let's wait for that. Just because you were talking about fellow trombonists, and that project is so beautiful. I'm excited to listen to some of that.
Okay.
But, yeah. So okay. So you had Married Couple, and this is like for me the genesis of a lot of the music that is still currently like happening in my own personal circle as well, in the Bay. But so you have Brass Magic, you have Duo B, you have Disappearing Completely. Like, what was sort of the genesis of what was going on after that? Like, what
Reorchestra, right? That's the next major project.
Yes, yeah, Reorchestra. We can mention that a little bit. So that was so Married Couple is like coming, I would say, more from, just overall, if you kind of want to boil it down to a sound, it's kind of coming from free jazz zone, kind of post, again, because of the instrumentation, but kind of like a post Ornette Coleman quartet zone of like bass, drums, and horns kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so, and acoustic instruments and things. Reorchestra. So as Married Couple wasn't really playing so much anymore, then I was at I remember going to some house party somewhere and hearing this band play, which was Reorchestra, and this keyboard player Matt Berklee was playing Rhodes, this drummer Adam Goodhue, a few other players, but they just had like this. I was loving their approach where it was like very groove, kind of like electric fusion groove kind of stuff, but like it's
kind of like a funk band, yeah.
I mean, but kind of coming out of like the Electric Miles, Bitches Brew kind of tonality of just like the Rhodes, and they're playing at a relatively soft volume, which was fascinating to me because it was like these intense grooves, but like pretty quiet.
Wow.
Anyway, okay. I was just like, I want to like be in this band. I just like decided at that house party, and so I started playing. They had a saxophone player at the time, and I joined as trombone player, so we had two horns in there for a while, and then bass player parted, and I decided to kind of audition to play bass, and even though I really hadn't been playing bass for very long at that time, and was definitely like the weakest player in the group on that instrument, but it was like, there was a certain chemistry that was like totally happening. And so guitar player Mike Abraham, killer player, who's now in the LA area, but was in the Bay for a long time. And, so that band went through some different versions over the years and things, but, 2004, 2005, 6, kind of in there.
Is this the first time that you stepped into a multi-instrumental role, not playing trombone in a band?
No. So the band I had in high school, I was playing bass also. Yeah. So I had been playing bass before, but at that time I was like, play trombone in the school band, play bass in the rock band kind of stuff, split it up like that. But I hadn't, I had played bass in the high school band, playing kind of like post Grateful Dead type stuff, but then more or less put it aside until getting involved with this Reorchestra project years later.
I was curious if we could play a little of Curiosity.
Ooh. Sure. Yeah. So that's a Matt Berklee composition. And I've recently kind of started playing with Matt again. And And it's something that, these are some tunes that we still pick up here and there. Yeah. Curiosity.
You're playing a 5-string here, right?
Yes, indeed.
Did you have any lessons on the bass or anything like that?
When I like in the high school, I had a bass teacher for a second, but I would say not, mostly kind of self-taught on that instrument. But the listening back to that, a big influence at that time was. Did you guys ever get into that band Dap Theory?
A little bit.
Andy Milne, Dap Theory. So Andy Milne had come out of like the Steve Coleman and bass world, and he had this band Dap Theory that Rich Brown, the bass player, who was very, I was loving his playing, and like Sean Rickman, the drummer. Anyway, it was like kind of this kind of groove type of stuff that we were getting to there. I would say was highly influenced by Dap Theory. I recommend. They had this album Trickle Down. That was, and they at one point they came to San Francisco. I don't know if you guys remember the club Bruno's, which closed several years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But and actually I think that recording that we just listened to was recorded there at Bruno's, but it was but the Andy Milne Dap Theory came in. They had like a 10-night run time. And
10?
Yeah, it was amazing that they would just have these kinds of residencies. And it was a very intimate room, kind of like set up in the round. And so I went to that several nights, and just, it was very influential in those days with that kind of like electric fusion-y type of sound.
Yeah, Bruno's was cool. I only got to play there once with the Mark Davenport of all people. Totally different hang, like indie rock kind of stuff, but very cool room. So what was the band from that recording then? Like, who was in the band
that we just listened to?
Yeah.
So that's Mike Abraham on guitar, Matt Berklee on keyboard, Adam Goodhue on drums, Surya Patri on percussion, and me on bass.
Okay.
And yeah, man, I just loved like the groove that the drummer and the percussionist set up together. It was just so fun to play with. I could just felt like it was one of those situations where you just felt like you could kind of do anything, and it was just like felt so good, And just like that bed, and so it was fun to kind of just rumble around down there on the low B string and just,
Yeah. When you play bass now, are you still on a 5-string typically, or?
No, I still have that bass, but it's actually needs some work. So yeah, I haven't played it in a while, but but no, these days I mostly play like a jazz bass, 4-string jazz bass kind of a thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
So when did Oakland Active Orchestra start?
Mark, do you remember? Were you there in the beginning? I'm trying to remember. I think you were, or at least close to the beginning.
I believe I was.
Like maybe 2009 or something like that.
Well, that was right when I moved, so I believe it might have been 10 or 11.
So, yeah, I think it. Yeah, maybe 2010, something like that. I don't know exactly. Around then.
So yeah, for listeners, this was a large ensemble of musicians who would all contribute, ideally, and composers and improvisers who would all contribute. And we had a few big shows and a big festival, and there's still there was the active series up until COVID, but the Oakland Active Orchestra has since dissolved. And in your email, Rob, you did talk about you said, I think about this group sometimes and the successes and the failures. And I think for a lot of us, running something like this is a huge idea, to have an ensemble of improvisers and composers who are all working together and all contributing, but it's just crazy logistically. So, I'd be curious to hear what your takeaways were, and like if we could all approach it again, like sort of where you might be coming from with that,
Yeah, totally. So yeah, to say a little bit more about the people that were involved in that. It was a big idea, I would say, that to start with, and it was like, it kind of was like a who's who of a certain scene around that time of just like amazing musicians and like big personalities and people with like strong musical concepts, kind of coming more from the experimental music world, I would say, in general. So that it would be like, I think, Lisa Mezzacapa was the person who invited me to be a part of it, and she was one of the founders of it. But also it was like, Aram Shelton was a big part of the founding of that. Philip Greenleaf, Damon Smith, Weasel Walter, Tom Dill. There were a lot of people, I don't remember exactly who was all there in the beginning and who came in a little bit later. It kind of morphed over time.
I came in later because a lot of those folks that you just mentioned were not in there by the time I was in. So
okay,
yeah.
Darren Johnston was involved.
Yeah.
So and people, and there were so there was wind instruments, there were string players, there were, and people coming from like pretty widely varied musical backgrounds. And that was all intentional, and I think it was like that was like kind of where some of the challenge of it came, was just, at least from my perspective, of just like, okay, how do you come up with a music for this? First of all, just that question itself, like, how do you come up with some music that's going to be like, that's really going to play to everybody's strength in a way when people are coming from like super different backgrounds, where like maybe some musicians in there like me are coming from more of like a, they kind of came up playing in like school bands and reading music and different things, and others are like have this totally different thing. They don't read music at all. That's not their thing. They're playing like from like a noise music perspective or something like that, and just like, and it's all good, but how do you like create the space to like, potentially to avoid some of like the conflicts that can come up around that, or at least if there are conflicts that come up, the way to like, kind of deal with them in a fruitful way, so that you can like come up with something new, so like, and so that, I found like that was, I don't know, I found it, so I thought like some people were were like pretty effective of like coming in with music that really did play to everybody's strengths in those ways. Like I thought Aram was really good at that, for example. Some of the music he brought in would like, it was open enough that it could really, you know, you could kind of, wherever you were coming from, it was like, it wasn't going to like pin you down. I felt like for some of the stuff that I would bring in was like a little bit too something, you know, like too much of like what I happened to be into at that moment of like, I want to get into like some tricky rhythmic stuff, you know, which tends to be something that I'm interested in. And that was like,
I do recall the piece that we played of yours regularly was a very beautiful piece. It started with a Shabazz. What was it?
Yes, I forgot about that one. But yeah, thank you for saying that.
That's a gorgeous piece.
You know, we have like these kind of layered, and I think you and I can kind of, you know, we had some similarity of interest of like these different little like overlapping rhythmic things and stuff.
Oh yeah, because I brought in
Shabam sketches.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah. Because I had brought in a toddler hammock, which had a similar like offset type of vibe.
Yeah, and it was like I was, you know, I mean, that was something where like that, you know, I think like Mark, like, you know, that was like, I appreciate you saying that it was a nice piece, you know, but it was like, I felt like it didn't really like work for everybody involved, you know, it didn't quite like get off the ground in a way that certain other pieces did that were more open. So, anyway, that was just some of the tension that came into that. And I feel like a group, I think there were like some really wonderful moments, you know, but it was just like, there were certain like things like that where it was just like, well, if it's going to be, if you have like a large ensemble with like very creative people and everybody's kind of like has their own aesthetic, like how do you, and there isn't exactly like a hierarchy or like a band leader, like how do you make it, you know, what are like the filters that I feel like are going to be like inspiring to everybody involved to like, you know, we want everybody to bring in their ideas, but like what's going to work, you know? And how do you decide on that for the whole group in a way that feels fun for everybody? Yeah,
that's tricky.
But I would say that like more recently, you know, this group that I've been involved with, the Duo B experimental band, it's kind of like the 2.0 version of that group for me, you know, where it's like, maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but it was, because it's a more recent thing, but it started as a group, you know, Duo B is Lisa and Jason, and then they put together this large ensemble version that initially was about, you know, they were definitely the musical directors of that and bringing in, it was like playing expanded versions of their musical concepts. But then over the pandemic, kind of morphed into this other thing where we would do these weekly Jamulus, these online sessions on Jamulus.
Oh, yeah. Can we talk about what that is?
Well, I think we should do a big old dive into that in a bit. Well, I mean, do you want to do it now? We can, and then we can. I still want to talk about brass magic and disappearing completely, but let's do it.
It connects. We don't have to go in linear order.
Yeah, it connects to this.
I never do.
Oakland Active Orchestra thing, so I think that's cool because it's another large ensemble. And so Jamulus, for anybody who doesn't know, it's just a piece of software that lets people play together online over the internet. Which a lot of us were trying to do when we were stuck at home, you know, during these times.
How well does it work? I mean, how does it work?
It's basically, you know, the question that everybody asks is like, you know, is there latency involved? Can you play together? And yes, there definitely is latency involved in that. You know, there's different programs, different pieces of software people get into that are like, you know, like Jack Trip and stuff like this that are like more low latency. Jamulus we found was the one that we were going to use because it was at least at that time was like the most kind of like plug and play type of solution where you didn't have to be like super tech savvy to get it running. And so there would be like 15, 17, 18 people involved on one session, all like kind of, you know, connecting from home and around the Bay Area, but also some players in Southern California. All at the same time. So there is some latency, which means that like it's not going to be the type of thing where you can readily, you know, just kind of lock into a groove exactly. But with that in mind, it kind of like informed the musical decisions that we were making of like, let's make music that doesn't rely on that way of playing, So just talk about it as like post latency approach, to making music. It was just like there was just lots of things that you can do that work really well in that format if you're not just like hung up on this idea of being able to like lock up on a quarter note, And so it just became much more about like kind of, it's just less groove oriented, although we did experiment with some of that too, but much more of just like, textural kind of stuff. But that group, as I said, was like, it started when it was more in person, it started much more of like an extension of the band Duo B, but as it morphed into the Jamulus model, it became more of an open workshop where everybody was bringing in compositions or different structures and things to play. And I think in particular, because of that format where it was like this kind of, post latency idea, and in a situation where like people can't see each other, right? So that's something to mention. There's no like Zoom component or anything. It's just audio. Right. And you could like have like a Zoom meeting running at the same time, but some people like their connection was not so good. Like right. You're dealing with right there, right now, Bob, just like turn the video off and just like focus on the ear. And, so I think part of that like kind of informed the decision of like what kind of music to bring in that would work well, where it wasn't about like, some tricky rhythmic stuff necessarily, but it was about like more, just lots of different approaches, but much more kind of textural and kind of open-ended in a way that would kind of allow everybody to fit in with whatever their kind of their musical background might have been, in a kind of a non-stylistic way, non-idiomatic.
So you'd send me a Google Drive with many, many recordings on it. Those are all Jamulus?
Yes. I think I sent you because I would record all of those sessions just on my computer, and as kind of like the librarian of the group, and just like put those on the drive for people to listen back to and whatever. And so yeah, we just played every week for months and months and months, and I would record all of that. And there's some good stuff in there for sure, but it's a lot. And so sometimes I like to just put it on shuffle, like if I'm doing the dishes or something.
So I was listening to your interview with Duo B, which is Lisa and Jason, and that was on a YouTube video that was called Way Out West Discussions, Episode 1.
Yep.
Oh, that's from the concert series, right?
What is Way Out West Discussions?
Okay, well, yeah. So first of all, Way Out West, as Mark was alluded to. So I was booking a concert series at the CJC before the pandemic. Every Tuesday night, I was running a series there for a few years, and we called the series Way Out West.
Is this the series where you booked Dan Rosenboom there? Yes,
absolutely, yep. And yeah, so we were doing that, and I just decided to use the name again for a short-lived. This was another one of these like pandemic projects of like, well, maybe I'll do some interviews, on YouTube. And so there's 2 episodes. One is Duo B, and one is the Schimsheimer family band.
Cool.
And yeah, you can find those on my my YouTube channel there. Some good stuff.
Yeah.
Your YouTube and your SoundCloud is a treasure trove of many things. But are you planning on doing more of those interviews?
I should. I mean, I'm glad you guys have more stick-to-itiveness with this concept than I did at the time, talking to musicians. So I commend you for doing that. But I think it helps that it's 2 of you guys doing it together. You can kind of like keep yourselves on track with.
Yeah.
A little partnership going there. But
team is very helpful.
Yeah. I enjoy doing it. I mean, it kind of came out of there was the writer Andy Gilbert, who writes a lot about jazz and around the Bay Area and other kinds of music. But he did a workshop at the Jazz School about like writing and reviewing shows and things that I attended, and it was directly out of that. And I was like, oh, it'd be fun to try my, give that a shot of just like talking to musicians, So that came out of that.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, he's pretty big figure
Yeah. And
that way out here.
Totally. But it's different when you're, musicians talking to other musicians is different from.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what I was interested in a little bit. Just getting under the hood like you guys do.
Yeah.
So, maybe we should talk about Disappear Incompletely.
Sure.
So, one of the things I don't often say about myself is that I'm a pretty heavy Radiohead fan. And this band that you have is a Radiohead cover band that you are the leader of.
Yeah.
And it started back in 2005, you said?
Mm-hmm.
But you guys are taking a different approach to the tunes. You're arranging them and soloing over them, and
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I was put the group together as just kind of meant for just a one-off concert back in the concert was early 2006, but and put the group together, we started rehearsing in 2005, but with that in mind of just like, I love those songs, and I thought it kind of like coming from the earlier discussion with Married Couple of like improvising on those types of tunes that we just, that I just love the songs. And it was kind of, for me, when I was first putting Disappearing Completely together, was like, as much as anything, was just an excuse to like study the Radiohead tunes. I just really love that music, and I just wanted to like analyze them and everything.
Yeah.
So I would do that. I would like transcribe the originals, like the original recordings, and then once you have that, think about. It definitely is not a thing where we're just like playing an instrumental version of the original. It's like definitely like deconstructing it and changing it up. But hopefully there's some recognizable aspect of the melody. But a lot of some of the arrangements are closer to the originals than others. But which is my approach to that has changed over the years. But yeah, that was a group that I put together and was like kind of the sole arranger and stuff for that project.
When did you meet Jamie Moore?
Jamie. So back in Boston, when I was out there was a band that was playing around town that I used to love going to see. They were called the Venus Band, and they had a weekly gig at this bar called Venus de Milo out there on Lansdowne Street near Fenway Park. And, it was like kind of a hip hang where there was like a, jazz, like kind of modern jazz, groovy stuff. And Jamie was the drummer in that band. Back then, he was a Berklee student. I didn't know him at the time. He was a little bit older, but I just loved to hear him play and that whole group. And then years later, when I was in the Bay Area, somehow he was connected with Joe Begale, who plays in Disappearing Completely. And I heard Joe and Jamie play. I was like, went to some show that Joe, I was friends with Joe because Joe had been part of Reorchestra later on. And I went to some show that they were doing, and the rhythm section was Jamie on drums and Joe on bass. And Joe is another multi-instrumentalist, but I would say like his main instrument is not bass, but just like the hookup that the two of them had on bass and drums, I was like, okay, that's what I need. So they ended up being bass and drums in Disappearing Completely. And Joe would also sing some in that group, but mainly play bass. Yeah, so I just love the way the two of them play together. So that's how we, I didn't know him from the Boston days, but I was a big fan of his playing from back then. And I didn't even know he had moved out here until I randomly heard him on that gig that they were doing.
That's crazy. I didn't know that's where he had come out of either. And also, when I first moved to the Bay, my very first house that I moved into, I took Joe Begale's spot, essentially. He was living with Steve Taylor. Right.
Yes, up in the hills there, in Oakland Hills. Yep.
And I remember that house.
Yeah, with every single keyboard you could ever want in the basement and a Pro Tools rig. That was beautiful. Anyway, yeah.
Should we play a little bit?
Yeah.
I was particularly drawn to the national anthem.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Let's do it.
This is maybe also a nice segue into our upcoming reggae discussion.
Ah, yes.
So here's the national anthem. So you're making all these arrangements?
Yep.
That was Cress, right? Patrick Cress?
Yeah. I should mention the players.
Beautiful.
That's Patrick Cress on baritone sax. And the other players in the group, aside from Joe and Jamie, who we mentioned, Casey Knudsen on tenor sax on that record. And then Michael Coleman on keyboard and Noah Phillips on guitar, and I'm playing trombone. And
what a cool band.
Thanks.
So when you're making these arrangements, how do you choose the tunes? Or I guess I should say, what are you looking for from a Radiohead song to work with this band?
Yeah, good question. I mean, because it's different things depending on the music, but some of them are like pretty, they translate pretty straightforwardly in terms of like it's just like a nice chord progression or something like that you can do your thing on. But some of them are not that. Some of them are just more like textural or just a groove or different things. So, but it's really, I mean, we arranged. We did a lot of different tunes over the years for that group, so it's a lot of different stuff. But it was never a thing of like I'm gonna do every song on this particular album or anything like that. It was just like basically any tune from theirs that I had an idea that I was like, oh, I could do such and such with this tune. That would be fun to play with this group.
Mm-hmm.
It could just be I would just be riding my bike and have some idea, hearing a tune, be like, oh yeah, let's try. You know how it is, musician, you get an idea, you just go with it.
Yeah.
I really like that you did Lucky, the song. That's one of my favorite songs to sing and play on guitar.
Okay. Sometimes there would be like a request from somebody. They'd be like, you gotta do an arrangement of, some particular tune. But, mostly it was just, I just loved all the music and whatever I happened to be listening to at the time. Just like, certain things didn't get off the ground arrangement wise, and other things did. Those are the ones that stuck.
Do you have any top hits for this group?
What do you mean by that?
Like songs that went well or arrangements that did well.
I mean, I like everything that's on that record, but there were a lot of other things that kind of came and went, didn't necessarily stick around as much.
I like that you have a fair representation of a Amnesiac, because a lot of those I often listen to that record and wonder how I would try to make those songs personally.
Yeah.
That's such a interesting record.
That was the first record of theirs that I got deep into. So that's, when I started this group, that was the one I was listening to the most. And,
interesting.
So that's not it's not an accident, but other things came in later. But yeah.
So this is my favorite question to ask any Radiohead fan is what's your favorite, or no, let me rephrase it better. What's the best Radiohead album? I mean, tough question. I will say this. People don't give Pablo Honey enough credit. Like, there's some great songs, not just Creep. There's some great songs on that record that I really like that record, even though it's more like straightforward, like kind of coming out of U2 and stuff like that. It's like, there's some great tunes on there. It gets kind of dismissed as like not the mature Radiohead, like post OK Computer or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I even like, I like all of them, and like even, some of the ones that don't get as much credit. I'm like, no, there's some amazing stuff on there. That's a very diplomatic response.
It's just true. It's just true. I mean, In Rainbows is definitely a classic for sure.
Yeah, in terms of a best, not a favorite, a best. I'm wondering if maybe In Rainbows might be up there. I know, but that I don't know. I'm just gonna get like what is it, ratioed? No matter what I say, I'm gonna get ratioed and canceled no matter what response I get.
I just love the evolution of the whole thing is so amazing.
I know, it's gorgeous. And the first one that I came in on was Kid A, and then I went to OK Computer, and then Amnesiac, which I found. I used to go get tutored at my uncle's. I'd go chill where his CDs were. So like I'd be listening to Mozart Requiem, and then right next to that he had like Amnesiac. So it was like a really interesting discovery of that particular record. But Kid A and OK Computer to me are, I don't know, they're very important records.
So I think sometimes when I ask people this question, their answer kind of dates their generation a bit, just because if the first album a person heard was Pablo Honey, it makes sense that you can sort of, you can still love the progression, you can love all the albums that come after it, but if the first album you heard was Hail to the Thief, well, maybe OK Computer won't be quite as earth-shattering, groundbreaking material because the later albums are a development of the earlier ideas, of course.
Yeah,
I mean, OK Computer is better sounding than Hail to the Thief.
The one that is generally, I guess, considered like their worst album. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but like, or at least in the mature period or whatever, it's like King of Limbs. But there's like some killer stuff on that record.
I 100% disagree with that. I think that's
my favorite one. I think
I love that record so much. Like,
good.
That's the one with. Good morning.
Yes.
But that record's amazing, man.
Like In Bloom and stuff. Yeah, killer.
Yeah. Wait, who says that's the worst?
Have you read the Stephen Hayden book? Like the book he came out with about Kid A?
No.
He came out like last year or something. It's he talks about like the different. Anyway, they're all good. They're all very good.
I love all my Radiohead albums equally.
I haven't. I got the. Did you get the mini disc thing that came out on Bandcamp a few years ago?
I did not.
Yeah. Mm-mm. So it was like mini discs from the like outtakes and stuff from the OK Computer session. but it's just
Like literal MD cards, or
no, I mean it's on Bandcamp, but it was like it was transferred from
I see.
Minidisc, and it
It
was
was
like
because they were leaked, right?
supposedly, yeah, and they were like somebody was trying to get money for it, and they just decided to put it out instead.
yeah.
But it's like a total mixed bag. Like there's a lot of live stuff on there, and I mean it's just like it's like hours and hours of random assortments, but there's good stuff in there. Like of course people have gone back and like indexed everything that's on there because it's just like these long files, but people go back and they're like, you should check out minute 24 through like 27, like all this certain things that haven't been heard in any other place and stuff like that. But and then there was something that came out recently that had like additional tunes like from the OK Computer. From the Kid A sessions, which I haven't checked out yet.
Yeah, they just put all their stuff on Bandcamp, all their major releases.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, so I think we should force all of our guests to decide which Radiohead album is the best.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about Radiohead. I didn't know you were a Radiohead fan, so that's cool for me to learn.
I'm large, massive. It's funny. I don't think Bob, you and I have not talked about Radiohead that much.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Huge fan. But anyway, well,
I think that most people are. They're a pretty famous band.
Yeah, that's true. But there are definitely there's some. I mean, one of the things that was interesting about Disappearing Completely was like, not everybody in the band was interested in Radiohead. Like that wasn't like a requirement to be in the band that you be a Radiohead fan. So people were coming to it. Some were, but others were not, just like that wasn't their background, so they just kind of came to it from a different place, which I enjoyed. It wasn't about being a cover band.
Can we dig into your relationship with reggae and talk about junior reggae? Because I feel like this is a big part of what you do. And I'm just starting to really learn more about what I consider to be like, real reggae, but just tiny bits here and there. And it seems like you've been deep in the lore for a long time. So when did that start for you?
Well, like a lot of people, of course, I was into like Bob Marley when I was younger and stuff, just kind of like surface level. I enjoyed those tunes, but later on, like I mentioned in passing, like Jason Levis, when I first met him, he was like deep into it with the dreadlocks and everything. And he probably got me into it first in like a more serious way. But actually that was, he had a band back after we were back in the Bay Area. He started this band called Joseph's Bones.
Yeah.
That still plays sometimes. And which I'm part of, which I play trombone in mostly. And so, and that was like around 2006-ish or something like that when that group started up. But so I always enjoyed that. But at a particular point, some years later, I don't know exactly when, but I was playing trombone in Jason's band, and then I've started to like think about wanting to put a group together, and I was kind of like wondering who to ask to play bass, because I was mainly playing trombone in that situation, in that kind of reggae context. And it was kind of like, their various names came up, and then I was like, man, I just love reggae bass, just like that whole world and certain players and that tradition. So I was like, well, let me just try to do it myself, So then we kind of basically, like, Jason and I became sort of a reggae rhythm section team of bass and drums.
Interesting.
And so we worked out a lot of stuff. Like, he was heavy into reggae drumming, and I was, learning more and more about reggae bass, coming out of the things like the Wailers, Family Man, Barrett, great bass player. But also like Sly and Robbie, rest in peace, Robbie Shakespeare, who died recently. Big influence. There's like these certain, like, it's really all about, there's it kind of, when people think about reggae, they think about like the kind of, cultural trappings and things, but like there's these unbelievable rhythm sections, coming out of that tradition, like all the way back from like the early ska and Scatolites and onward through like roots reggae and more contemporary stuff. But I love those rhythm sections, so that's really where it came from. And also like the world of dub.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The world of reggae is so, it seems like an endless dive. Like you can just keep digging and digging and digging and just find more bands and more obscure artists, and like it's all over the world. And it's just, there's so much to it. But dub reggae seems even more endless.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that music seems to be created electronically.
Yeah, well, so that word means a lot of different things to different people, these days. But in terms of like
what does it mean to you?
Well, in terms of the kind of like the classic definition, I would say, coming out of what was happening in Jamaica, going back to the 70s with like certain producers, like most notably like King Tubby is like, there are others, but he's like kind of the innovator, I would say, where it's about taking these existing tracks and the producer then can like make a live mix using those tracks, like dropping instruments in and out and using different like echo and different effects like that, different like filters and things to create a new kind of basically like an improvised composition using these pre-existing tracks. And, so it would be, and a lot of times it would be like it's pretty fascinating just to like learn about the culture of like the sound systems in Jamaica, they would call them, which basically like DJs that would set up their big PA systems at outdoor parties, and like these what they call like dub plates or different recordings that would like basically a mix that was like made specifically for like a particular DJ to use, and not sold in a store, but just like they did it in the studio, they hand it off to DJ and they play it at their particular party. And so that's something to think about. Also, it's just like I love thinking about just how recorded music works in different spaces. So if you have like a massive system with like huge subwoofers and stuff, it's gonna like have a different impact than just like listening on your headphones or something. But it's really music design for certain environments. Recorded music design for certain environments.
Man, was Kool Herc from Jamaica?
Yes.
Because it sounds like you're talking about the birth of hip hop to me. You know what I mean? Like in the South Bronx.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
that is super
came out of that
fascinating.
culture for sure. I mean, I don't remember all the details, but yeah, Jamaican connection for sure.
Wow. So they would actually print plates specifically for parties?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it would be like an acetate, so you wouldn't get a lot of spins out of it.
Yeah.
These kind of, you would get like, it would just disintegrate after a certain number of spins. So, and you kind of, in a way, so like I said, it's kind of like improvised performance, so you could do like several different dub mixes on the same basic track, which would all be different because you were just like on the fly, working the faders, bringing the bass in and out, and the drums, adding the echo and stuff. I think it was also like, it's fun to read about because I think it was also like a lot of times, it would have been based on like a pre-existing tune that had vocals, but then you would just kind of drop the vocals out. But maybe you would play like just the first little snippet of vocals, then fade it down, and then you can imagine people at this party who like knew the tune, singing the tune without the vocals in there, or just kind of fading it in and out in different ways, like a DJ would,
with like heavy delay.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm curious, how does this older practice that you're describing translate into the kind of electronic music that people call dub today? Do you know the progression there?
Well, yeah, so that word, like gets tacked on to a lot of things.
Just to be clear, I'm not talking about dubstep. I'm talking about, like, if you go into Bandcamp and look for dub reggae, you'll find like tens of thousands of albums that are all mostly electronic. There's sometimes vocals, but.
Mm-hmm. There's, for one thing, I think it's, there's just, in the early dub days, it was just like a pretty limited set of tools that the producer was working with. You know, it really was just like the effects that were built into the board. You know, so you're just working with like faders and things like delay and reverb. You know, that's pretty much it. You know, and certain little sound effects and things. But then more recent, you know, you just have more. You know, you're doing things like on a computer. You just have like way more effects and things. So, and like working with all sorts of different instruments and different sources and things. You know, so I think it kind of goes in more directions. But and maybe like, you know, as it gets into kind of like post like dance hall type, you know, more basically like reggae that itself is like more electronic oriented, like more of like digital production, as they say, like kind of post like the 80s electronic drums, and also you know, like using like bass lines that are made on the Casio keyboard and stuff like that, as opposed to the classic kind of rhythm sections and things. So then I think it's more like just kind of in the box producing, less about using a live rhythm section. That might be one change that happened at a certain point, kind of.
Also, this music goes worldwide, right? Like people in
Sure.
Russia and wherever just making.
Mm-hmm. But one of the things, you know, to kind of bring it back to some of the stuff that we were working on, like with Junior Reggae and some other projects like that, and Joseph's Bones, for sure, Jason's project, was like this kind of like you know, translating some of those dub effects to like a like live performance, you know, so without not like running things through effects necessarily, but just kind of like, you know, kind of like in a sense like emulating some of those effects with like delays, for, you know, as one simple example. Instead of like actually using a delay pedal, you would just like, you know, play a fading triplet on your trombone or whatever, you know, as one example. Or do things like Jason does this really cool thing on the drums where he kind of imitates the sound of a delay, you know, just by using like certain combinations of like doubles that are fading out and stuff like that. It sounds like a delay, but it's just like, you know, played acoustically. So we like to mess around with that kind of stuff, for sure.
So now Junior Reggae is a band. I've never heard another band quite like Junior Reggae. I wanted to play the song Junior Reggae from the album because it's so, like, I didn't transcribe it, but I just listening to it, I couldn't find a repeated bit, or I didn't notice any patterns or anything. So my question was, you know, is this through composed?
I mean, there's some repeated bits, but it's a long melody. This is a Jason Levis composition, and it's you know, and it came about. We were putting some things together for this album, and I asked him, I was like, why don't you do like one of these like Jason Levis type melodies over a reggae groove? Would you be into that? He's like, yeah, totally. So it connects back to things like It Looks Like a Pie to Me and stuff like that, you know, like these intervallic things. And I know specifically he was like kind of coming with some ideas from Bartok when he was composing that one. But yeah, so and then this one had like, so the regular lineup of the group is me and Jason, and then Steve Blum on keyboard, and Max Miller-Lauren on trumpet and keyboard. And then we also had our good buddy Corey Wright playing clarinet on some of the tunes and on the record. And I was like, we got to have some, you know, clarinet in a reggae band. Of course, you got to have some clarinet.
Yeah, of course.
Also, you had John Finkbeiner engineering, who is also, you know, rest in peace.
Definitely.
It's tough for me to talk, but sometimes. But he was also really, really deep in the lore about dub. You know, like he was the one who first told me about King Tubby. And did he influence any production decisions, or was he just like an engineer, like hanging out? I was curious about that. Like if he was involved, because he must have been super geeked out in general.
Yeah.
I also know that he was like a very good neutral engineer, and he was very professional.
Yeah.
So I was just curious.
I mean, so first of all, John, just to give a little context, I mean, great guitar player as well, and he was like, we played together a lot in different bands, but he was part of Joseph's Bones. He was one of the guitarists in that group.
Okay.
And there were 3 guitarists, and it was John Finkbeiner, John Schott, Miles Boyson.
Dang.
And
woof. What a team.
Finkbeiner was like the main like skank guy, He would be like playing what we call the skank, and which would be like the upbeats, the reggae, classic reggae kind of upbeats. And Miles would a lot of times be playing like kind of like we call it like the stuck line, which would be like single line stuff, sometimes doubling the bass line and that kind of thing. And John Schott would be more like free agent noise kind of stuff. But anyway, like John Finkbeiner was like, his rhythm guitar like was just, killer, and it wasn't just the chicka, chicka, it was that, but he would like bring a lot of different variations to it in a way that,
Yeah.
So I actually do have a recording with him too that I don't know if you heard or not, but project. But anyway, he was engineering that, but actually Miles mixed the record. So there's some dub versions and stuff on that. So it was much more Miles as far as like doing that kind of creative post-production kind of stuff.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, can we listen to a little bit?
Sure.
Bobito?
Yeah.
You want to give it a spin?
Yeah, this song is fascinating to me. There's so much going on in so many different dimensions. Yeah, so this is Junior Reggae. That is some pretty maximalist reggae.
So you won't be able to see this, but this is that chart, the Junior Reggae tune, and you can find it in the Bay Area Jazz Composers book.
Oh yeah! Shout out to Ryan Pate for putting that one together.
Yeah, so it's included in this book that people should check out if they can. Bay Area Jazz Composers.
That book. We are all contributors, I believe.
Yep, I contributed.
Right.
Did you get your copy, Bob?
Yeah, I did.
Nice.
I haven't actually dove into it yet.
You should play through it. It's fun. It's really, really fun to... Anyway, but yeah, that's cool.
That's good to know that that's in there, though, because I'm definitely going to have a look. Because This tune is wild.
Yeah.
So tracking this, oh wow, you were on duties of bass and trombone throughout.
Yeah, I just played a little trombone here and there, but mostly bass.
Okay.
And it was and also Jason and I played percussion on it too, and had a lot of fun with that, dubbing in all those toys and things.
So I've played in reggae bands a couple times back in the day, and it's always been for me a tremendous exercise of like patience and steadfastness, trying to constantly stay in the pocket and make it sound relaxed and fun. I've only ever played guitar, so it most of the stuff is relatively simple. It would be like a couple chords for like 20 minutes or so. And I just wanted to ask you how you're able to balance the essence of the music, which is, this deep groove that, it's usually a very simple, deep groove that you stay in for a long time with, your music in junior reggae with your many, many chords and time signatures and whatever else you.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really sure exactly what you're getting at, but I think it's like, I will say that it's it's a funny thing because it's like such a deep love for reggae, but totally outside of, any kind of reggae scene, of just like, it's just not, we're not like playing those types of gigs where you're like, playing there's no singer. So that makes a huge difference, of course. But, it is just like a deep love and respect of that tradition. But coming from this kind of left of center approach, I would say. And, so we've done like, I would love to do, if anybody's listening to this, I would love to do more like collaborating, dyed in the wool reggae musicians, but we're kind of coming from this like weirdo side of it. But it'd be fun to kind of go more into like the center of that tradition. Well,
and how strong is that scene out here in the Bay?
I mean, there's definitely stuff happening. We did a double bill, or I don't know, opening act or something with this singer Earl Zero, who's in the Bay Area, who's kind of like a OG Jamaican guy, killer singer, roots reggae guy. And he had his band of local folks who were like reggae musicians, which I respect that, but it's like you were saying before, Bob, of just like being totally committed to that rhythm guitar concept. It was like, that's a little different from what we're doing.
Yeah. It's all the instruments, have to work towards this sort of deep groove essence of this music. So I saw on your SoundCloud, you have the Bay Area Reggae Collective. Is this something that you are trying to wrangle?
Yes, it's official. But I don't know how much more it is than, a hashtag. But there was like a handful of groups that had some kind of overlapping personnel, all of whom were like a little bit, who love the music deeply, but, aren't necessarily, are coming from like a jazz background. So that would be like junior reggae. There's a band called Franco Nero that Scott Larson leads, which is more of ska band.
Okay.
There's this great band called Gorilla Hi-Fi, which John Finkbeiner was very involved in, and Miles Boyson and a lot of people more kind of coming from more of the dub side of things. So there were just like a handful of these bands, and it was like, and then I had a band also called Pavlov's Band that I was running, which was more of a larger group, with, like several horn players and that kind of thing, more coming out of like the classic Scotalites type of vibe. And, so between all of those groups, like there was definitely like some personnel, a lot of cross-pollination going on there. So, so there were like some gigs that we were trying to do of just like doubling up and having rotating lineups and stuff. post pandemic, we'll see how that all looks. But there is, it's like all these bands that mostly, I guess, Scott's band, Franco Nero, which does play fairly regularly, has a great singer, Allegra Bandy, killer. I recommend checking them out if you come across them playing around. But a lot of it's instrumental too.
Who did If Brahms Were a Rasta?
We're just giving Jason Levis all the love today. Yeah, that's a classic Jason Levis. Basically anything like referencing like classical music in any way, it's a pretty safe bet that's like,
Oh, yeah. that all checks out.
But so this was a tune that he wrote from back in the Joseph's Bones days, and has become another one of his like songbook classics that we play in different groups.
Yeah, I thought that was a fascinating tune.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's switch gears pretty harshly and talk about Long Tone Sally. Is this an improv band or is that a piece?
Beautiful recording.
It was a piece. So that's a group that I put together that was just performed one time so far, but it was like a group of just trombone players, and I forget exactly how many are there, but like maybe like 15 trombone players or something like that. And we played. There's the venue Studio Grand on Grand Avenue, which is no longer.
Did they shut down?
Yeah, I think they lost the space. I don't know. Well, I think the venue's still there, but this particular series wasn't there anymore. But
14 trombones.
14, thank you. Don't want to, exaggerate. But so I thought, that space, it was kind of like a, pretty reverberant room. And I just thought like a kind of a trombone choir might sound nice in there. So I had that space in mind when we put this group together. We were going to play a set there. And so I just like hit up all my trombone buddies, see if they would be down to do it. And
are these all local cats?
Yep. And from all different zones of trombonistry. Jazz players, classical players, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was just wonderful, it was a thing where it was like a pretty simple piece where it was like, we had kind of had a starting point. The name of the piece is Long Tone Sally, kind of gives you some idea what it's about. Long tones. Mm-hmm. We would all kind of start on the same note and then, focus on long tones, different kinds of resonances and things. And it would go on over a period of 45 minutes, I believe it was what it was, but it was, other than that, it was largely improvised. And just to kind of, and it was documented. So that's, there have been other pieces, with this type of instrumentation, but it was just fun to get everybody together and try something like that. And but it was also one of those situations where it was like, everybody just wanted to like hang out. It was, you had to like kind of like, all right, we need to play this piece now.
Did you rehearse it?
No. Yeah, there were some written instructions that I sent out to everybody ahead of time, but that was it. And then we just did it. Yeah.
14 in that room. I mean, Studio Grand wasn't the largest room, but it was very, very reverberant. That must have sounded, because we should listen to a little bit if you could, Bob, but that must have been so beautiful to experience in the room. That's incredible.
Yeah, you kind of like had them all arrayed around in a, kind of a semicircle, so you would just be surrounded by this glory.
I would love to write for this band.
Yeah, I would love that too.
All right, here's a little excerpt from Long Tone Sally. Those high tones are like a sad dog or something.
Man, incredible.
It's really cool.
Incredible music. Are y'all do you have plans or ambitions to get that together again?
When's the tour?
In person? When is the tour?
I mean, I would love to, it's just one of those things where it's like, it was just like the perfect time and the place. So to figure out the right situation, but it was like a Monday night at Studio Grand. That's where everybody was like, you can make it happen. But anyway, it was an inspiring thing to do for sure.
That was a good series.
Yeah.
Are you at all into the composer Horatio Radulescu?
No, I don't know that name.
Yeah, he's definitely one of my personal favorites, for sure. He's got a number of pieces that are for many of one type of instrument, like 40 flutes. He's got like a string quartet times 4 or 5 or something like this. There's like 20 pianos turned on their side. Really, really great stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, very beautiful. I would like to talk about Sifter a little bit before we wrap, because I know you have a record in pre-production right now, and you are sort of in a way adjacent to a group that I've been in called Lost Shapes, because we were both working at the bar called Woods, and we had residencies where we could develop our sounds. But Sifter is a very, very cool group, and one that Glenn talked to us about on our episode where we talked with him. So can you tell us a bit about that and like what the state is of the record that's going to be coming out with that? And then yeah, and also like so that's you, Jordan, Beth Shank, and Lisa Metzacappa, correct? Yeah. Okay, cool.
So kind of returning to that bass drum and 2 horns vibe that we were doing with Married Couple back in the day. But I put that group together with the idea of it being a composers collective, with everybody writing for the group. Yeah. And so I knew everybody involved was like, I loved their compositions. So, and had like very personal voices, and, everybody's kind of coming from a different thing, but we also have played together a lot in different situations. Beth, I didn't know as well going into it just because she hadn't lived out here as long, but we'd played together in other contexts. Beautiful player. And
yeah, man, I feel very lucky to be playing with her. She's great.
Yeah. But so we as you said, we kind of put it together with that. I was playing even more at Woods, for a while there. I was playing there every week, and initially it was more like pick up bands, playing different things. But eventually I wanted to, and that was cool. But I wanted to morph it into more of an opportunity to develop original music and like fixed personnel kind of stuff. And so it ended up being that we put that group together, Sifter, to have that gig in particular once a month, and then also Junior Reggae was playing there once a month, so kind of alternating. Both groups being able to focus a lot on original music and cool. develop our sound. So, and that went on for a number of years. Great opportunity to have that for sure. And I miss it. That place has since closed, of course.
I miss Woods so much. That was,
we lament
one of the rarest, beautiful places. But anyway.
Yeah. And so, but things change. We carry on as best as we can, but, so, it had finally, actually pretty recently, like that band has been playing together for quite some time now, but recently, getting our act together to make a formal recording. And so, planning on some dates in February to get in the studio, and cool. We have a lot of music and just get some of it down.
Yeah. I'm very excited to hear that all recorded. And I know you've been rehearsing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's very cool. What Fantastic band. Cool. What else are you like pumped on? What else you got on the horizon, or what are you dreaming about?
I just, a couple things that are just fresh in my mind, stuff that's been happening recently. This is just a funny little story. And I think I mentioned it to you last time we met that I was gearing up for it, but we did this show the other night with some of the guys from Metallica. And,
yes,
it was very interesting, I mean, I don't, not to just get into like name dropping stuff, whatever, but like it was this gig that, Metallica is doing, like, had like this whole like 40-year anniversary thing this weekend. Mm-hmm. They're playing Metallica played some shows, and then they had like various little side projects and stuff. And I was playing on one of these side projects called the Wedding Band. And the concept of this group is that it's like Kirk Hammett and Robert Trujillo from Metallica is like their side project. And the idea is that they would play like music from that they loved playing when they were growing up. So it's all covers from, I didn't really know what it was before we got into it. I was like, okay, that makes sense. I didn't know what they were going for, but so it's like funk tunes and, kind of like they were playing like Black Sabbath and stuff. It's just amazing to hear like Kirk Hammett play like, War Pigs. Just like being in the room with that was just a very unique experience. But
where did you guys play?
We played at the Fillmore. Like Metallica played at the Chase Center, and then after that they did this late night show at the Fillmore. But
and you were playing trombone?
Yeah. So they just like, there was a horn section. I was part of the horn section for that. And so like the horn part was, kind of, window dressing kind of stuff. I mean, it was fun to be a part of it, but it was mostly just amazing to be in the room with these guys, Also, John Theodore, the drummer. I don't know if you guys know him, but like he plays with, he was, I think, the original drummer in the Mars Volta. And
oh, shit.
He was like Queens of the Stone Age. He's like this big, rock drummer dude. And, just like they, I mean, they're playing, because you're just like, this is like a big famous band or whatever that I listened to when I was a kid and stuff, but Metallica, but to actually get in the room and like they're like great musicians, and not just like in the sense of shredding or whatever, but just like to be able to like just create this like vibe, and like Robert Trujillo, the bass player. Yeah. Interesting guy, like he's been in Metallica for a long time now, but he was like, he was like produced this Jaco Pastorius documentary from like 10 years ago or something. Mm-hmm. He's like this big kind of fan of Jaco and different stuff, but like his playing, he's a great player, but I just felt like he was like one of these players that like every note counts. There was no like kind of going for like some choppy stuff just for the heck of it. It was just all like perfectly placed. And the same with Kirk Hammett, even though he's like, mostly soloing all the time and stuff. It was just like everything was just right, just beautifully placed with the wah-wah pedal and everything. And they had like this incredible like vibe and work ethic, and they just want to like rehearse, even though the tunes were like not necessarily that complicated, but they just was like, after all these years, they're just like, I just found that super inspiring, not just to like be in the room and see how they go about their thing. So yeah, it's just a different culture, of like kind of like on the one hand, just like the rock music culture, but also the culture of like, you can just imagine. It's hard to imagine without like being there, of just like a band that's like played in these massive venues for decades, of just like how to like generate that bigness, which is just so different from most of the music I'm involved with. And I imagine most of what you guys are involved with, where we're just used to playing this more kind of intimate thing in different settings, but they just like have this way of projecting, and it was like, yeah, it's maybe kind of unnecessarily loud in the rehearsal and stuff, but still it's just like powerful, just like I was very inspired by that.
That is super cool. And also Yeah, it feels like I'm wondering with what you're talking about with is it a part? And you like really, because whenever I've played in rock bands like that, it's usually been on drums, and I've like felt the most comfortable as a drummer in those contexts because I get to really define my own part, and like that's my creative contribution. Come up with that, and then you want it to be as good as possible, And so, do you feel like even though there is some like flexible room, it's still like that's their part? You know what I mean? Like that, like.
Yeah, but I do think that's right. But also the sense of like the role of the different instruments, where it's like Kirk Hammett, lead guitar, other guy, rhythm guitar, like it's like everybody kind of knows what they're doing. But
yeah, what a trip! But they were cool. You had fun.
They were super cool, and like
I'm so glad to hear that.
Trujillo
awesome.
was like pretty outgoing. I think Kirk Hammett is a little more introverted or something, but like both super down to earth, which is just, it was amazing to me. But I have some like I did like a rehearsal video recording of them playing War Pigs. I got like pretty much the whole tune. I'm gonna send that to you guys because it's just
please.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. But then just one other thing, that also happened this weekend was like playing with another like long-term project to me that's been really important is the Marcus Shelby Orchestra.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's very
How long
cool.
have you been doing that?
2009 I started. I've been playing trombone with those guys.
Yeah, such an amazing group. You're playing in the big band, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I just got to play his opera.
You were involved with that?
Yeah.
Nice, man. I'm sorry I didn't get to see it, but it sounded amazing.
It was a very cool opportunity, and shout out to Vado for recommending me for it.
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Vado, yes. But yeah. I got to meet Marcus, and what a beautiful person, man. Like,
yes,
very sweet,
totally.
Very generous, and very open. And so
yeah.
you've been involved in this project since 2009, and this is, like you said in the notes, this is where you've learned a lot about like swaying and getting deep into the.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
He's like coming out of a Duke Ellington, strong Duke Ellington influence, and last night we played the Duke Ellington Nutcracker Suite.
Yes.
And,
yes.
which I love.
Been listening to that a lot this last week, man. That's
nice.
Super cool.
Yeah. We've played that a bunch over the years, but it's like, it's kind of a holiday classic. But, I've playing trombone in that group and in other big bands too. But, especially that other big bands kind of like focus on other stuff, more modern or whatever. But like the Shelby band is like kind of straight in that blues and swing tradition. And, I love that.
Cool.
It's very, very important to me.
I used to have drum lessons with Paul Romaine, my drum teacher, and for the holidays we would do the Duke Ellington Nutcracker, which is funny because it was just Sam Woodyard, chopping wood. Ding,
oh yeah,
ding, cha, ding, just
wide
2 and
pocket.
4.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, and he always described his drum fills as like, it's like someone pushed a set of drums down the stairs and then it comes out perfectly on one somehow. You know what I mean? He's so whenever I listen to Sam Woodyard, I think about that. It totally checks out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who's drumming in the band?
It's different players. Last night was Geechee. You guys know Geechee? Geechee Taylor?
No.
Maybe not. He's a multi-instrumentalist, but great.
I thought he was a trumpet.
Yes, he's mostly known as trumpet, but he also plays nice drums.
He was playing. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I know him strictly as a trumpet player, but okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, he tends to bring in different drummers, over at different gigs, kind of different flavors.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
But that was the first time back with that group, since the shutdown. So it was good.
Yeah.
Good to get that going again for sure.
Beautiful.
Very, very nice.
Where'd y'all hit?
That was at SF Jazz.
Ah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you have a Bandcamp page, you have a SoundCloud, you have a YouTube. Is there anywhere else that people should go check you out?
That's pretty much it these days. You know, I like to rant on Facebook, so you can hang out with me there. But that's pretty much it.
If by rant you mean provide extremely helpful educational commentary and videos and
Well, same with SoundCloud too.
sparking insightful discussions.
I forgot about what I had on SoundCloud. That's funny you guys are bringing that up.
No, it's cool. I was listening today, and I want to talk to you more about the diminished chord approach, because I've been trying to dig through, in the diminished scale. There's all the 4 major and the 4 minor triads, and approaching it that way. But I really loved your quick talk about using the chromatic scale and neighbor tone approach for a diminished chord.
Cool.
I was like, all right, absolutely.
Yeah,
that all makes
things that you're doing on Facebook. Even the stuff where you're like, has anyone considered this or thought about this album? It's quite good, because the way that you present information is just really, you have this calm demeanor, and it's just, you make everything really clear and concise, and it's really good what you're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah, and you're the only person, I believe. I mean, I've just known you to make rehearsal videos that you share with bandmates for particularly difficult gigs, and I believe for Bob and Jason, right? There were demo videos created.
I'm not sure what you're thinking of, but
no, I just know that like you had made like I feel like at least for the Levis septet or sextet, you had created like a video that you shared with the band members, like for like, all right, cool, this one's tricky.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, totally. yeah.
And I love that, just that spirit of like sharing and shedding.
Heck yeah, I love to share and to shed.
A good share and a good shed.
Yes, and one of the projects that I know we're probably winding down here, but one of the projects that was very inspiring to me, like during the stay-at-home times, was like recording Bob's music recently.
Oh yeah,
recording some trombone.
Onkos.
Yes, totally. So that was like one of the more creative recording projects I've been involved with in a while. It was very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that all turns out.
Yeah, I had fun contributing to that as well, for sure. It's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you for both of your contributions on that. It was supposed to be released. It is supposed to be released this year, 2022, but there's been quite a number of delays in the industry, so it might get pushed back. I don't have a release date yet, but I'll let you know.
Cool.
Put it out March 1st. That's when the Snacks record is coming out. Let's put it out on the same
perfect. Day. Yeah, good idea.
Boom.
Yeah, I believe that there were some vinyl pressing delays that kind of pushed everything back for the label.
I'll talk with you after this, but you need to update me on the label sitch. That's cool.
Oh, it's Ewing, or the same label that put out the first album.
I didn't know that. That's killing, man.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, God bless Ewing.
Sweet.
Yes, God bless them.
Whenever that comes out, I'll be posting the heck out of it on Facebook.
Yes, me too.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you so much, Rob. And please listen to Rob on Bandcamp, SoundCloud, and check out Long Tone Sally on the grams and on the Twitters. right? That's your handle for both of them?
That's right.
Long
Yep.
Tone Sally.
And we can be found on Twitter at tones_FOR and Instagram at FT4HB. Say hello, drop us a line, follow, subscribe. You can find us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and look for Fantastic Tones for Human Bones. You will find us. I guarantee it. And we appreciate all of your support. Please subscribe. Please like. Please rate. Please recommend to friends. We're really trying to talk, have good conversations with good musicians and really get into the weeds with them. So we hope that you all, we appreciate your listening, and we hope you appreciate what we're trying to do. So thank you all so much.
I was going to take us out on Sifter Suite from your live show with Sifter.
Sure.
All right.
Do it.
This is Sifter Suite from the band Sifter.
Mm-hmm.